ka whakapona, sorry, my apologies, kai whakatapua tātou me ngā mea, e whakapono ana tātou. Humie, huie, tākie.
We have a apology, but we'll be zooming in from the Deputy Mayor who has meetings in Auckland. In respect of the order of business, in discussions with the iwi, just with a number of moving things, I would like to deal with the iwi partnership agreement at 10 o'clock. That is that if we're partway through an item at that point, I'd like to adjourn that item and then welcome our iwi in to be able to deal with that substantive item on the agenda.
We move and accept the apology.
So would someone be prepared to move the acceptance of the apologies? Thank you, Councillor Courtney. Seconded, Councillor Pakipaki. All those in favour, please say aye. In respect of one very serious matter of business has been the Nelson City Council spud growing competition judged by Councillor Bench. And I think it being such an urgent matter of public business in the up-run to Christmas that the Chief Executive should be required to report on it, and Councillor Bench should have to apologise for apparently quite controversial calls.
Oh, look, it's very serious competition that was held on the outside the cafeteria on the third floor, and numbers of teams from around the council, including a team from Robin's teams, and she's calling some foul play, I think, in the proceedings because there was no winnings from her team, but. A very esteemed judge from Matthew, who I understand is a world spud growing competition and went to accept his award in Geneva sometime in the 1980s, but that's another story. But anyway, he was a very harsh judge, and pleased to say that the EA team won the best presented pot with some great extra work on that one. Very pleased to say that the science environment team were the best in growing potatoes, and that gives some good.
Did we check with our GM?
Kia ora, Nigel. Can I just ask a question? Was there any opportunity for any kumara to be involved in the competition?
I think that's a very good call. But as we all know, kumara have been very short supply this year at Kahu, but we will endeavour to make sure that there is a section for that aspect next year. I'm sad to report though that the Parks and Gardens team, when they unveiled their spuds, had failed to grow any potatoes. So that's something I'll be talking to Andrew White about on his return on Monday. Thank you.
Can we congratulate the EAs? It's a reminder to all of us as to who really runs the place. We come to public forum. Is there any member that wishes to declare an interest related to today's council business? There is none. There is no public forum. My mayor's report has been circulated. It principally deals with the issue of Plan Change 29. I wish to put on the public record that we welcome the very high number of submissions. That is a response from our community that says that they care about the future shaping of their city, and the Chief Executive and the planning staff have made very plain that they want to maximise that engagement. I also want to note that it is, with those number of submissions, going to put substantive pressure on Mandy and the planning team staff and the processing and reporting on those, and also on the hearings panel, and to signal to them that, look, with so many submissions, it's inevitable it'll take a bit more time to do things, and we should take that time to ensure that those people who have taken the time to be submitted are appropriately heard in that process. The recommendation in my report is that you will note there was a relatively small number of late submissions. Most of them actually were on the day, but just a little bit tardy, and also some in the few days after. I have the view that we're not compromising either the process or anybody else's submissions by accepting those that are late, and that is the key recommendation in the report. And I'd like to move from the chair the recommendation you have before you on accepting those late submissions. Welcome questions on the process and the report. but also any questions about my recommendation in receiving late submissions. Councillor Sanson is happy to move. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Stallard. If there is no debate, I'll simply put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, say no. That is accepted. We now come to item 6 on the agenda, which is the annual report from Uniquely Nelson. And we welcome Alish Nayland, Susan Coleman, and I think we may as well have Simon join us as well in the presentation of this report, which is on pages 8 to 37 of our agenda. Let's grab another chair and have all of you together.
Through the chair, the mayor will also have the chair. Chris is just joining us now.
Thanks for your work over the course of the year. I think we would all accept that the year you're reporting for 22-23 was pretty tough for the retail sector. And can I particularly acknowledge, Simon, even on the worst day, you're an energy bunny. And this community really values the degree to which, even in tough times, you're always looking for the positive and how we can present the CBD as well as possible. Can I also acknowledge your work around some of the safety and security issues in the city, where it's not exactly perfectly within the terms of reference of Uniquely Nelson, but I love that pragmatic approach you take, and that says it will indirectly impacts where we're having safety issues in the city, and for your coordination with both my own office, council officers, and also with the police to ensure those issues are addressed. So thanks for that work, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Mayor Smith. It has been an interesting year, or should I say an interesting winter, with Nelson CBD and the businesses and hospitality and retail. There's been a lot more wraparound this winter with our businesses, with wellbeing. We've partnered, we had a partnership with MBS on a temporary basis. They are now a key sponsor for Uniquely Nelson, and I put money in. It's a 2-year contract. That money goes straight back into the CBD. Part of that money has been with the program called Buddy for Business. I would like to spend a wee bit of time on this because this is quite crucial at the moment, where we're dealing with 3 businesses which weren't really happy at all, and it became quite distressing for us at Uniquely Nelson, some of the staff as well, dealing with some of those issues. But partnering with MBS, Buddy Up for Business, they are now a key sponsor of that, and they wish to relaunch that. It's always been there, but it's a wellbeing. It's around mental health, financial help. Businesses can seek through the different agencies, marketing advice, those sorts of things, accountancy advice, just to make their job a wee bit easier, especially when they're confronting some of the market forces that are they feel as though are opposing them at the moment. And it's just Nelson, it's nationwide, it's worldwide. So having MBS is one of our big achievements coming on board for the year. Some of the other partnerships, we've formed a very strong partnership with Nelson Airport. This year there was about $27,000 in support, some in cash and some in kind, with some of the advertising at the airport to run initiatives and outside of Nelson to bring people or put the spotlight on Nelson. So those sort of partnerships, people say, what do we do at Uniquely Nelson? It is networking and it's relationship building. From the small boutique retailer up to our entry points, so as the airport, working with the airlines. So those sort of things allow us to have more income to promote more of the city. So our relationship with the Central City retailers, focus on engagement, has been absolutely 100%, and the staff in the office, particularly one of them, huge wrap around there because they're feeling the pressure as well, because it is quite an emotional job. People we know in our community, our friends, we know their dogs, we know their birthdays, we know everything. It's a bit like being a hairdresser, which is actually, when I say I feel as though we're quite privileged in our position with Uniquely Nelson to be able to provide that. We are not commercial, we are there as a body funded by NCC, probably about 60%. The rest of the money we've generated through revenue, through membership, additional advertising and other partnerships we've formed. We've had a couple of cork and talk nights, evenings just for businesses, where we put on a function. They come along, and it's not really anything official. Last one we did at the Morrison Cafe, we had just on 100 people. Businesses come, put on a few drinks, and we did that halfway through winter. We do 2 of those a year, and that's quite for them to come along. Like I said, it's not an official event or formal event. It's for them to come along and realise we're all in the same boat, rowing against what feels like an incoming tide. As I said, on a night and a stormy night, that storm will pass, that tide will change, and we'll go back out together collectively. So it is and I have brought up here, which I just wanted to highlight, the Nelson Advantage. This here has been a game changer for our city businesses. This publication is an electronic newspaper for the Nelson City, and it comes out every Wednesday. We spend Monday and Tuesday in the office doing the pagination like a newspaper. We now have 2 reporters that write for us, and it has anything and everything that's going on. So does this control the? This? So if I scroll down. Okay. Okay. Here we go. And to get it to go down. It's going to go down. Like I say, and this, especially in the last 12 months, and this is what all the businesses and retailers want, is every week support by us to promote them outside of the city, out to the Greater Tasman area. We have 16,500 consumers on our database. We have one of the largest consumer databases, which is comparable to the actual local media. You can see that focus on that slide. So we follow the businesses on their digital footprint. They don't have to send it to us. We actually have software that will find it. And this goes out, so you click on whatever those slides are, and it goes through that business. Our open rate for this ranges from anything from 38 to 45%, which for a newsletter as such is quite high. If you can get your newsletter open rate up to over 10%, you're doing quite well. So this here was a game changer, and we look at this every 6 months. What else can we do better? And this has helped maintain, which is quite important, our current membership. We only had about 4 or 5 drop off who'd been with us for 3 or 4 years. Our renewal rate is really, really high, and we've brought in new businesses this year, which would have been about another 8 or 10% of new businesses in these hard times. So I congratulate our staff, especially Michelle and Chandra, for keeping their pedal to the metal. But that is, for us, has been a game changer. And built into this is also the virtual reality, which is another aspect. We're still the first town or city in New Zealand to have this technology where you can walk through the businesses and walk through town. So if you haven't seen it before, I do encourage you to go through it. It changes every week, but you can have 30 or 40 businesses on that slideshow going through. So that's just some of our, I'm going to say highlights, or that's how our year has been at UQ Nelson.
Thanks for the report. Appreciate you keeping it brief and timely. Are there any questions from colleagues? Let's start with Councillor Robb.
Thanks, Mayor Nick, and if you'll indulge me, I have 2 questions. Simon, nice to see you, and I trust that your potato went well in the potato competition as well. 2 quick questions for you. You're doing a lot of work in the with virtual reality with businesses now. How's that going? And is that getting a lot of reach from people from within New Zealand, but not in Nelson?
Correct. That virtual reality, in our first 8 months, we had 100,000 views. So virtual reality is we would go into a shop and with a camera, and we stand on the street and we take a shot, it's like a photograph. You walk in, take another shot, take it back, download it, and you can go on some of the to the businesses we have listed, and there's their listing. A reporter would have done a story on them that would be our lead out story for the following week, and you can go through and look through the shop or a gallery. It's really good for galleries, big spaces. You can click on, we embed into the virtual reality their websites or any other connections they want. We can run competitions, as we currently are. We launched yesterday with Santa. So instead of putting a elf in a shop, you're going to find it to do a bit of paper. We're running one at the moment, and we've got $2,300 worth of prizes, TVs, sunglasses, hospitality vouchers, and so forth, as a prize winner takes all. That's how we build our database. We've got from 812 8 years ago to 6,500. So we have more people to actually communicate with. And the virtual reality We got to 100,000. We even had a couple of beers in the first 8 months. Over 3.5 years, we've had 5.5 million views of people going into businesses and looking around. No other town in New Zealand is doing that. It's glorified window shopping. It means people can come into the shop, look around. It's like walking past a shop at night, looking through the window. Some of the shops we can embed videos and go into a gallery and look at a picture, you click, and the artist will talk to you and explain what the artwork is. So, and there's more work to be done in that space. There's the likes of augmented reality coming up in the next 2 or 3 years. A lot of money involved in that, so I won't put my hand out yet. But that virtual reality and that newsletter work hand in hand. So it is, and the reach, 5.5 million views. Most of those are local. You can see a few come in from Paris and New York, a little blip on the reporting, but most of it is local people looking for takeaways, looking for somewhere to shop.
Cool.
And the retailers love it. They then get the coding to put on their website. And so we GPS them, when we shoot it on the street, we GPS that with Google Maps, and half our clicks are from Google Maps. So it's working with third party.
Cool. And just one quick question. It's quite easy for us as the elected members to walk up the town and walk into a shop and see how people are feeling. But what's your view on how people are feeling out there as we go into Christmas time with the store owners? Are they happy, sad, anxious, worried, excited?
They're anxious.
Yep.
They're anxious. It has been, like I said before, it's been our hardest winter. I think especially in the last 4 winters anyway, since COVID. The likes of Black Friday, it's not actually good for them because it sucks a lot of money out of the bank account just prior to Christmas. And sure enough, when Black Friday, which may be one day after 4 or 5 days had finished, the following week, 2 or 3 of them said, well, why do we open up on Monday or Tuesday? So those sorts of things, which are bigger, it's good for big boxes. It's probably not so good for boutiques or smaller shops. Big boxes have got mass buying power, distribution, and not leaving spent $4 million just on marketing for those 4 days. So it's hard for the smaller ones, but they've got to be in the mix.
Councillor Courtney, then Councillor Rainey.
Thank you, Mayor Nick, and through to Chris and Simon. It's great to see you here. And thank you very much for the work you're doing. What sparks my attention is the business, Buddies for Businesses, to support businesses, especially around well-being. And I want to know how you determined who is in need of that service. What triggers that for a business?
I've sat in meetings where I'm talking to someone and they completely burst into tears and lose the plot. And we have, especially Health Action Trust, Wendy Strawbridge. I've spoken to her many, many times this year. And I said, I've got another one for you. So you pick it up. We're in and out of majority of the businesses. We're boots on the ground every day. Some days you're out there for the whole day, some days you're just out on our site, just checking in. So there is that, Campbell asked how the retailers going, the anxiety. They were so looking forward to summer, put it this way. They were, and from, there's a clothing shop spends $140,000 up front for clothing for the next 8 months, 9 months, not knowing where they're going to be able to actually gain that back. And that is, when you've got businesses putting a second mortgage on their house to keep their business going, is not a space you really want to be in.
Thank you.
Councillor Rainey.
Thank you, Mayor Nick. Nice to see Chris and Simon. For many years now, I've been commenting on what I think is the need for a retail strategy for the city. And I noticed on page 7 of your report and 16 of our agenda, your comment about developing scope for a central city retail strategy. It's great that it's in there, and you mentioned the City Centre Forum. Should we do it? How can we do it? I presume the board's got a and you've got a bit of a position on this. Do you think there's any need, or and if so, how would we do it? Who would commission it, and why aren't we getting on with it if it's a good idea?
Yeah, I think probably an answer to that question is that the individual organisations who are responsible for looking after the CBD, which would include NCC, NRDA, ourselves and Chamber, we need to be working closer together. I think we need a joint strategy. I think probably that needs to be led by NCC, because what tends to happen is a lot of all the positions on those boards are volunteer. And so it's very easy to get busy with your own daily lives. And it is going to take time to develop a strategy and find some common ground. So I think that, in my opinion, the shepherd needs to be someone within council to lead that. And that's both from a retail strategy and and marketing a region as well. And although operationally we work quite close together, strategically, I think we should be working closer. There has been some discussions about trying to get together, but the other things get in the way. I think COVID certainly has got in the way. And each organisation has their own strategies and objectives to meet. So it's very difficult sometimes to find that time. So I think we need to make time to develop that joint strategy so they're all working towards that end goal, and also pulling resources as well, because if we're going to make an impact nationally, we need more than limited budgets.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for that. And Mr. Mayor, potentially this is something that we could ask the chair of the what's the City Centre Forum to consider putting on the agenda, to try and take into account what Chris has said, to try and look at making some concrete steps.
There are good of you to raise the questions and take that high level around the retail strategy. The council is planning this high level summit in March around the future of our CBD as we work through the LTP process. I think we should raise with the Deputy Mayor, who's working with me on that summit, the suggestion around the involvement of Uniquely Nelson in some of that conversation, that big picture strategy that you've picked up on there, Pete. So let's take that discussion offline. I'm really keen for that summit to address some of the longer term issues that both is in Simon's report and that you've raised with that point, Pete.
Yeah, and if I can just comment.
Yeah.
I mean, I did start talking about this over 10 years ago, because I looked particularly at retail strategies for Newcastle and Adelaide and other cities in Australia that have been remarkably successful. And it always gets general enthusiasm. Yeah, it's a good idea. Since then, retail has really suffered. The time has arrived for us to get on with it, I think. Just want to comment on that regard.
One of Pete's regular refrains as one of our most experienced councillors around the table quite often is, yes, Mr. Mayor, we've talked about this before, but I want to see some action. And I'm sympathetic to that point of view, and then it's just around timing that relative to resources. But I think Councillor Rainey does throw the gauntlet down to us a bit in that regard. I'm excited about the potential of the summit in March to help us crystallise those ideas and the way going forward. And so I'm supportive of Pete's view that we want to get some runs on the board. I think there is an atmosphere in our community of expectation, both from the retailers and the community, that we're going to get some runs on the board. And now it's about designing the runway and the right level of engagement to make sure we get there. So your points are well made, Councillor Rainey. Any other questions? Can I just conclude by noting, Chris, that your board is a volunteer board, and I want to contribute or thank you about the other board members, that you're all businesses under pressure in your own right, that are freely giving of your time to work and oversee Simon, and keep him on the straight and narrow, make sure that his boundless energy is put to good worth. And I think on behalf of council, we would want to pass on to you personal thanks, but also make sure that thanks is passed on to your other board members for the collective work that is done by Uniquely Nelson in tough times to keep our city relevant and alive. On that note, we'll conclude, and would someone be prepared to move the adoption of the report? Moved by Councillor Campbell, seconded by Councillor Rainey. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, say no. That is carried. We'll move to item... Just going to take a 2-minute leave. My understanding is that Jane has just arrived. That would mean that we have all of the people to be able to move to the partnership agreement. we might just want to adjust some chairs and things. So with the council's indulgence, I'd just like to take a 2-minute break for us to prepare for consideration of item 7, just checking that all the relevant people are present. So just a 2-minute adjournment, please.
Tātou e rari te maru o tātou whare. Tēnā koe, manu koro o te kaunihira ara koutou katoa. E hui nei. I te wā e tīmata ai tēnei kaupapa ki te whakatūwhera, te kaupapa Shane Mahu e whakatūwhera.
Tēnā koe, Jane. Tēnā koe, Victoria. Te mare i roto tēnei te tātou nei piringa whare. E tika ana kia te kumihi atu ki kaupapa nei. Ko kotahi ai tātou I runga te hiria o te āpo pōtano o tēnei o te karangatau kei Wanganui a tāo te tā. Ki a koe e te koromatua nei, tira ki a koutou Nigel, tūmon whakarai. O tira ki nā tangata o te iwi wharamai nei, ka tangata tia mai I hea, tēnei kumihi. Tira ki a tātou nā kaunihia o te kaunihina nei. Pai mareri ki a koutou kainoi. Puri te hae mana no rongo ko humai te haka tū I mauni matatu. Mai a ki ronga, mana mai ki ronga. Haumi e hui e.
Tahi ki.
Koe. I'll see you later.
Tia te rangi, tuhia te ngā kau o ngā tangata, a ko te mea nui o te ao, te tangata. A tēnā koe whai e tū nei, ngā atua Māori katoa o rangi nui, Nga i a tātou, o tātou nuku, e takoto nei. A tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Ka maru ki e rau nanga tika wā. Nau mai hama. Nau mai kira toi te pomo whai e tū nei, te tautoko, te kakao. Tēnā koutou. Kia koe, Johnny. Nāwani nui kia koe, o tō wahi. Te whakanui, te hākore Māori, e iwi. Ewa o reira. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou kātou.
Thank you, Councillor Pakipaki, and a warm welcome to Jane as the chair of our Marae Committee, but today representing the collective with yourselves of our 8 Te Tahi Ihu Iwi. Can I thank the very significant amount of work that officers and iwi have put into the draft partnership agreement that we are considering today. The suggested format for this discussion was firstly to ask Pania, as the lead officer for the council, to present her report. I'd then like to invite any of our iwi representatives to make comments on the draft iwi partnership agreement. I'd then like to have questions and dialogue from any of the councillors that would like to raise those, and then ultimately for council to then to be able to debate and consider the recommendations. I want to emphasise in today's deliberations what I think is actually pretty amazing and pretty ambitious. And that is to have a partnership agreement across Tita Ihu that includes 3 councils and 8 iwi is incredibly challenging. Myself and my wife, in one of my very important relationships, sometimes struggle to agree. Myself and the chief executive, a very important relationship. To get 8 iwi and 3 councils all to come to an agreement is a big hurdle. And in my view would set the scene at a time when issues of treaty and its part in our country, were we able to achieve this, I think it would have Tita Ihu leading in a very constructive way on difficult issues. So I make those opening comments, look forward to Pania's report. I do want to take some time in dealing with the significant agreement, noting that it requires firstly the consideration by all 3 councils, by all 8 iwi, and the proposal, and it does not come into effect until all of those agree, and that is planned to be advanced next week, subject to constructive discussions and approval at each of the 3 councils and 8 iwi. Over to you, Pania.
Tēnā tātou, tēnā koutou katoa, koutou kua raru mai nei, he me I kau atu ki ngā iwi kua tai mai, hei tautoko ana tēnei kaupapa, hei hoi a tēnei waka ki a kotai. E no o humari a hau I raro I te korowai aroha o te manaakitanga o ngā iwi o te tau ihu tēnei te me I kau atu ki a koutou. Anō uki ki a koutou ngā te kauneira, he me I kau atu ki a koutou. Ko Pania a hau. I'm here today with Johnny O'Donnell to present to you. Johnny was brought in and agreed to by the 3 councils and the 8 iwi to help facilitate us to navigate our way to where we are today, which is with a draft partnership agreement. And so our partnership is familiar to you all. We've been doing it for a very long time. We've had an agreement in place, a formal agreement in place since 2005 with 6 of the 8 iwi post-treaty settlements. We have been in discussions with iwi, the iwi chairs and council since 2019 on the review of a partnership agreement. And in 2022, it was agreed by the Te Tau Ihu Chairs and Mayors Forum that we would not halt the a reviewed agreement solely with Nelson City Council, but that we would have a joint agreement across Te Tau Ihu. And as you are all aware of, all of the 8 iwi have affiliations across Te Tau Ihu, and so that relationship was important to iwi with the 3 councils. So we've had a number of conversations about what's important to the relationship, and what's presented today and to the other councils is a high-level agreement on principles that we can agree to in terms of how we, what the expectations are of our relationship. So I might just pass over to Johnny to talk about the document itself and anything else.
Tēnā tātou katoa, ngā tuatahi me mihi ki ngā whānau nei, ngā mana whenua o tēnei rohi, ngā iwi taketake o Te Tau Ihu tēnā koutou, ngā kaikaunihira mihi ana ki a koutou katoa, te koromatua tēnā koe, tēnā tātou katoa. Look, I only want to make a very brief comment, and it's really first to acknowledge that my role in this as an independent party between the 11 partners to the agreement has been a very easy one because we've got highly engaged partners, and I think I consider ourselves as a region to be incredibly lucky that we're of a size and scale and nature of our community and our region that we do have really constructive dialogue. And so to step back, to consider the history of those relationships, the potential that the interplay of those relationships offers for us as a community and for a region was actually a remarkably easy job. The part that was hard and that is incredibly important is finding the right words to establish a shared language between those partners so there is consistency and alignment in our understanding and expectations of what that partnership actually means, represents and looks like in practice. So this is not new work. This is a reaffirmation of and a recommitment to a relationship and a partnership that already exists. And many of the people in the room here today, alongside me here, are those who paved the way for that partnership to be in a strong position to sign off on an agreement like this collectively, and did so under much more challenging circumstances. And so, you know, I do want to acknowledge and thank you, Mayor Nick, for your support in getting the agreement to this point through the Mayors and Chairs Forum and the constructive dialogue that we've had at that forum to get to this point. But I also want to thank you for acknowledging the changing and evolving context nationally, that we see it as the backdrop as we approach the important milestone of confirming this agreement. The reason I think that acknowledgement is so important is because this agreement was really important when we started drafting it and we started discussing it. It's even more important today as we speak to you here and we approach a signing next Tuesday. And the reason it's so critical is because in many respects it's not about what's happening out there. This agreement is about our region, our community, our relationships, and the positive and constructive view that we take to the potential that those partnerships offer for the betterment of all people of Te Tau Ihu. And so I hope that as councillors and elected members receiving this document, that it reflects the aspirations you have for the partnership, that you see the strength and potential of having a narrative between partners that you can come back to as a touchstone, as a foundation, coming back to first principles, because there is a lot of work and a lot of interactions that you have. And so think of this as a compass, as a navigational tool, something to strengthen and enhance the work that you're already doing and you're already committed to. That's all I really want to say, and I'd prefer to hand the time back for questions and dialogue. Tēnā koutou.
Just like to hand over to the Chief Executive, and then if there were any of our iwi representatives that would like to comment. Nigel.
Thank you, Manik. I'd very quickly just like to acknowledge the work that Johnny and Panya have done behind the scenes to make all this happen. I know there's a huge amount of work, a huge amount of effort. And I do want to specifically acknowledge you, Johnny and Panya. I had a meeting on Tuesday with the Te Tahi, who are Chief Executives and GMs, and that conversation was fantastic. We were talking about the partnership. We were talking about the way we want to work. We were talking about investment opportunities. We were talking about the Right Trees Task Force. We were talking about difficult issues like future wastewater treatment plants and where we're going with that. And we could have that conversation in an authentic way, and we could be open. And that's because of the work that Johnny and Panya have done behind the scenes to get that relationship going. So I'm really proud to be part of this going forward. And I think we should sing from the rooftops that we're going to sign this thing. Thanks so much.
Can I just acknowledge our Deputy Mayor, who's in Auckland, has just joined us on Zoom. Mainly reminding myself, because he's so good on standing orders, he'll pull me up if I do something wrong. Can we have, are there any comments that any of our iwi would make before I open the report before council over
Thank you, Nick, and thank you all for the words. I'm here on behalf of Ngāti Rāua, who sees not only a document of potential that acknowledges the past, but focused primarily on the future. The future of this region in a combined and collaborative way just makes common sense. Nigel alluded to some of the opportunities we talked about yesterday. We're here to talk, we're here to help, we want to participate, we want to be in for the long haul, which we have been for the last few hundred years. We're not going anywhere, so it makes sense. We want to be part of the discussions around our inner city, where we have 4 of our iwi buildings located. We want to be part of the river, the water here, which is our great city, is acknowledged as being the lifeblood of who we are and where we come from. So we're invested in this place. We're ready to do some work, and we look forward to our iwi chair signing this agreement next week, if it comes through and the positive from this council today. And I want to congratulate you. I know it's difficult. I know it can be challenging in terms of getting your head around this, but I assure you, if it's a principle-based document, we're in the ballpark, we'll be okay. Our people look back and look at this time and moment as a cathartic moment. And actually we said, okay, we're willing to give this a go. And we might not know about everything. We might be building a little bit as we go. But if we're based on the fact that we are focused on the future of our rohi and our people, we won't go too far wrong. So, tēnā koe te koro mātua, tēnei te kōrero Ngāti Rāua, tēnā koutou pai mai.
Kia ora, Shane. Any other comments from our iwi leaders that have given their time today for this significant discussion? If we get hard questions, we might need your help. Let's open over to now to questions the councillors on the report and the recommendations of the council authorising myself to sign the partnership agreement of which all this work has gone in. Any questions? Councillor Skinner.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for everyone being here today. Just a problem with question to the Mayor and the CEO. I see there's obviously been a lot of meetings with the iwi chairs and mayors forum. We also have a iwi council partnership group on council that 4 of us councillors are members of. As of yet, we have not met. So my question to our staff and our mayor, what is the case of that? Because that would have been a good chance. I saw that as, and also.
Yeah, no, really good question. I think it actually gives really good context to what's before you. So the Nelson City Council signed an MOU with 6 iwi in 2006 that set up the framework for the existing council committee with these 6 iwi. The piece of history that has intervened between that period is that in 2014, and I'm very proud, to have been part of the very difficult negotiations with the 8 Top of the South iwi that led to the treaty settlements in 2014. The Crown recognised 8 Tita Ihu iwi. At the very first meeting that myself and then Chief Executive Pat Dougherty attended last year, the iwi expressed a view to the Nelson City Council that there was a real complexity and actually just great resource limitations in the Nelson City Council having its agreement when actually there were 2 other councils, Marlborough and Tasman. And their request was that be put on hold if, and that was very clear, if there was an appetite for developing a very ambitious 3-council 8 iwi partnership agreement and for the framework to work in that way. It was a unanimous view, including supported by the then Chief Executive, that was a more efficient way in which to try it. And so the work of the last 12 months has been saying, rather than either the councils doing the stuff over and over again, the difficulties of the council iwi partnership, excluding 2 of the iwi whose mana whenua status had been recognised by treaty settlements. So the reason that has not met was as a consequence, and I take responsibility as mayor, but it was at the request of iwi because we wanted to put the energy and effort into seeing whether we could develop a new framework to succeed that which was a good thing, and I'm proud the City Council did it in 2006, but it's also my view that events since 2006 have superseded that structure.
Just in response to that, and maybe to answer further, so this iwi Council Partnerships Group, which is separate to the iwi Chairs and Mayors Forum, that was a good chance for us as 4 of us councillors, and hopefully when we can represent more of our council table. I would have liked to have seen us meet with iwi because that's part of that connection. I know every day we connect as we do connect with our community as a whole, but on that forum and on that scope, I understand the dialogue in regards to the greater Top of the South connection, but I would have thought that would have been that could still go ahead. Just voicing it, and I've been waiting and hoping for that meeting to eventuate, or many meetings, but none have. But I'll leave that there because that's a good chance for us to pre-discuss with those representatives in Nelson.
Thanks, Councillor Skinner. Johnny was going to make a comment, and then I was going to have Councillor Sanson.
Just in response to that, a very brief comment, which was to draw your attention to the annual partnership wānanga that's set down as part of this agreement. Look, one of the things that I can reflect on as someone who often sits between all of these partners on various different initiatives is that the capacity constraints and pressures on both councils and iwi are very real, and they're not going away anytime soon. And one of the things that we have to get a whole lot better at is prioritisation and strategy. And so hopefully the way that you've read and interpreted this document is that it is an effort to get alignment across all of those 11 on what those shared priorities are, which then filters back down into all the individual initiatives and relationships that you have as a council. And so the reason I table that in response to your question, Councillor Skinner, is because the relationships that I can hear in your question that you're keen to develop and the dialogue you're keen to engage with, that is exactly the thought behind the idea of having one collective get together as annually to talk about those shared priorities, talk about the relationship, and then set the way forward rather than kind of doing that on an individual basis all the time.
But just my view is that it's important to have that local connection and relationship. Nelson iwi, which is what the iwi Council Partnership Group was about, and that's what that greater one can feed into that. But I seem to think we've done that a little bit at the expense of our relationship. Local.
Yeah, I think councillors should take, and certainly my recommendation will be, and it'll be a decision for the new year, if we proceed with this new iwi partnership agreement, which is my strong ambition, then council would need to review its governance committees to then align our structure with this new agreement. with the previous governance structure being aligned to the MOU that dates back to 2006. Councillor Sanson.
Thank you, Mayor Nick, through the chair. Yeah, I think I was just going to clarify that I think the committee that we had was part of, it was part of the previous governance structure, and my understanding was that it hadn't been kind of reinstated because of the request from iwi to work on this document. So I just want to acknowledge everybody who's put their work into this, and my question is really just, I think this is really significant, and I would like us to do a recorded vote, so a division, when the time comes. Thank you.
We'll come to that after we've concluded questions and comments. I'd like to take Councillor Matty Anderson and then Councillor Aaron Stella. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, through the Mayor. Whakawela hea atu ki matolosi, well done. Manuina ho, this is a blessed day. Look, I'm very supportive of this. I also, along the lines of Councillor Skinner, quite often I don't hear enough around council chamber, and it's not because it's not happening. It's so if this is a mechanism through that we can communicate better, and council can be more informed of the work that's going on, that'll be great. Also, I'm just so massively supported. This is amazing work. I'll probably catch up sometime. We've got questions, but just apologies, I have to shoot off my my matamua is getting a science award at Boys College, and I must go and celebrate that. So thank you so much. Yeah, you'll be noisy, but yeah, very supportive of this agreement.
I'm going to have to work out to make sure that if we have a personal vote, we'll get you texted, because I think it would be very good to have your vote, given your strong support and advocacy in this area recorded. Councillor Stella.
Thanks, Minik. I am interested in just hearing more details, if we have them, in any aspect of the action plan that's mentioned in the last page.
Pania, I think that's one for you, for Johnny. I'm very relaxed.
I think I might give it to you.
Okay, kapai. The action plan is the reference I made earlier to in response to Councillor Skinner's comment, which is how do we establish between those 11 partners what the priorities are, and the timely priorities, because they will change year to year. And so the action plan will be something that will be developed collectively across all 11 of those partners to continually realise and execute on the ambitions that are set out within the document. So that is something that you would see emerge following the partnership wānanga once the agreement is set in place. That is to provide a collective view of those priorities, and I keep emphasising the word priorities because that's what it's going to take, is working out what those really high level priorities are. It doesn't override or exclude the council from doing their own action plans around the partnership, and to Mayor Nick's point before, reassessing and resetting around the existing governance structures and plans that you've got. That would be a shared plan, and it would emerge following the signing.
Any other questions from colleagues? Councillor Pakipaki.
Tēnā tātou. Got a bit of a changing landscape at the moment with the nature in terms of how we as Māori are going to be having a relationship with our central government and also our local government bodies. One of the main components of this plan, in particular the wording around the acknowledgement of the tiriti, is I can see it potentially having problems, because of course this was developed before we had our magical 100-day plan that's going ahead now. So what do you think is a pathway forward? Have you got advice for us? Should there be quite aggressive actions by the government to remove that connection with that relationship?
Tēnā koe, Councillor Pakipaki. Look, this relates to the comment that I made in the opening, which is that this agreement is between 11 partners. central government are not a part of this agreement, and you'll have your own dynamic and relationship around that. And I know we all watch with interest what's playing out there, but that's why this agreement is so critical, is because it affirms your commitment to that relationship at a regional level, at a community level, and that's a commitment that you're making to each other. And there's not another partner in that; it's the 11 partners that are signatories to it. In terms of if the context was to evolve and require a response to things that are listed in there, like there is relevant legislation that is set out in this agreement that may well change over time, and considerations around things like Te Tiriti principles. The main thing I would note there is that within the agreement we have accommodated for a review mechanism every year, and so if the context needs to be updated to better reflect the sort of backdrop, then there is the flexibility to do that should all partners agree. But this agreement is written for the moment in time in which we stand, and is an important affirmation of those things by the partners that are set out in the agreement.
Councillor Bench.
Thank you, Mayor Nick. I think this is a great agreement between the 11 of us. It's just us. And I can't say that I have a lot of background in it. But at the meeting we had at the Marae with the other councils, the gentleman Barney, I think, is that? Yeah. Yes. He said something which really stuck with me, and I thought it was the best thing said all day when it was talked about the iwi joining with the councils. And Barney said, how about you join us in our waka for a bit? And I really like that, because it doesn't mean we have to stay in the waka forever, but if we're going to do this with integrity, we probably need that. And I'm a rather practical person, which probably annoys everyone else on council at times. But I'm going to ask a practical question. People are going to look at this agreement once it's signed and say, what's going to happen? I'd like to know, where would the first 2 or 3 places that you would take us if we got in the waka? Are there some burning ones that need addressing? Is there 2 or 3 places you'd like to take us?
I don't feel like that's a thing that I can speak on behalf of, but to acknowledge your point, and then if anyone else wants to jump in, they can. I think that those priorities, the top few things which you've identified, are exactly the conversation that needs to be had in that partnership wānanga. But one of the things that Matua Shane alluded to in his opening is around the economic potential that sits within this relationship that I think can sometimes be a blind spot. We have a whole lot of interactions through legislation, things that are often carried out through obligation, things like resource management and whatnot, and that becomes often the weight of the relationship. But sitting between those 11 partners is a lot of pulling power economically for our region, and alignment of resources and priorities could make a really material difference across Te Tauihu, across the top of the South, if we can have the conversation at that level. And within that, I acknowledge that this is the first time that you'll have a relationship agreement of this kind with your other councils too. And so it is a stronger Te Tauihu approach. It involves those critical partners. And I think that whilst it's not for me to speak to what the priorities would be, I would suggest that with the stage that the iwi are post-settlement, that there is a huge amount of dialogue to be had around economic development potential for the region and how to pull together on those. So there would be something that I would expect to see come out in the priorities. But I won't speak to where they would take you on the waka. You'll have to just jump on and trust, I think. Many destinations.
Tania.
Tēnā tātou. What I'm hearing from elected members is a desire to be more connected and to have a relationship and to build something that's meaningful. And we could talk about what the priorities are, but you need to have a relationship. When you go into a marriage, you don't really go in blindly, but you would trust that their intentions are good. Hopefully you've already had a cup of tea with them and got to know them. And I guess that's where it starts, is right at the basics and building the foundations. And that's what the partnership agreement is formalizing how we're going to move together in this relationship.
Okay, if there's no further questions, I'm going to move from the chair the recommendations that is provided in our report, that we receive the report, that we approve the draft, and that we authorise myself to help on behalf of it, and would seek a seconder, Councillor Pakipaki. Thank you for that seconding. We now move into debate mode, and I am going to make some high-level comments about the document. The first thing is New Zealand's been on a journey in the recognition of the Treaty of Waitangi and our special relationship with Maori over the last 50 years. That goes back to the establishment of the Waitangi Tribunal, the first of the treaty settlements, and I was very proud to be the Associate Minister of Treaty Negotiations when significant settlements were done during the Bolger government that laid the foundations for the treaty settlement process. The initiatives and the Nelson City Council should take pride that it was one of the first councils in 2006 to enter into a former MOU. I also think this community should take great pride with the Marae Committee here in the establishment of our Whakatū Marae in the 1990s. Then, again in the last decade, the intensity of the process that ran for 10, 15 years for the very significant treaty settlement legislation that was passed in that decade. And if there's anything around this council table that I will be very firm on, and that is having breached the treaty in the 19th century, having put all that energy and effort into that treaty settlement, I worry for the future of this community and the future of this country if those treaty settlements are not honoured both in letter and in spirit. The reason I'm so supportive of this partnership agreement is firstly because, in my view, it breathes life into what was intended with those treaty settlements, and in my view, the sort of relationship that the top of the iwi leaders who signed that treaty back in 1840 in a contemporary way. Now, I don't underestimate the challenges that we have as a community and as a nation in trying to navigate this pathway where we honour the treaty, but we also need to be a modern liberal democratic society in which we treat all New Zealanders as equal. And the tensions between those two competing interests is not easy, and there will be bumps, but I'm an optimist that believe with these sorts of partnership agreements and with goodwill in this little corner of New Zealand, we can find a path that works for us. Councillors and Iwi know I'm also a bit of a pragmatist, and I'm not one that likes excessive bureaucracy. I like to be able to get on and do things. And when I attended my first Top of the South Iwi Summit, and Iwi threw the challenge down and said, we get a bit frustrated having this conversation with the Marlborough Council and this conversation with the Tasman Council and this conversation with the Nelson Council. Why don't we be bold and try and do something on the Top of the South? There was some who thought, what? Get 8 iwi and 3 councils to agree? That sounds the impossible. But that hui agreed, let's give it a try. I look at how long it often takes to get two parties to come to an agreement. And I think that within 12 months, to be able to produce this document with all 8 iwi and all 3 councils saying this is possible and a way forward, I think is a tribute to the effort and the goodwill that there exists in Tita Ihu. And so in supporting this resolution, and it is within the context of which there are some bumpy debates occurring nationally about the future of the treaty, my ambition and hope for our community is that we're small enough, we're pragmatic enough, we've got good relationships to be a haven for how we can practically get on with this work in a way that works for all people at the top of the South. And yes, there will be times of disagreement, there will be bumps on the road, but this partnership agreement, in my view, provides a good platform for breathing life into those treaty settlements, honouring that which was signed back in 1840 in a very practical way, making this work for the community that we have the privilege of being involved in its governance. And that it is my pleasure to move this resolution. Would the seconder like to exercise his right?
Rohan's going to disappear in 30 seconds. If you would like to speak, if that's possible.
I'm going to.
I will defer to one of my co-master here to speak first.
Ask for a contribution from the Deputy Mayor.
Oh, tēnā koutou katoa, and thanks for squeezing me in, and apologies I couldn't be there. Although I'm slightly further north than Tamaki Makaurau and somewhere that feels quite appropriate, just sitting on the lawn here at Waitangi, where the founding document of our nation was signed, and just reflecting on the fact that as a country we are a country born out of partnership, and one in which we can only succeed and move forward through that partnership. And I want to start by acknowledging Te Tiriti as the document that gives us as councillors and elected members the mana to do the work that we do. Local government is fundamentally a partnership space. We don't do anything without working with others, and the most crucial of that relationship is with our iwi. And I want to acknowledge the mana that's in the room that I can see from Zoom, and I think I can feel all the way at the other end of the North Island. Moving, I'm really excited, and I didn't want to miss this one because this is a significant step forward. And can I acknowledge Mayor Tim and Mayor Nadine and the Tasman and Marlborough councils, as well as former Mayor Rachel for her work in this space. You know, so often we expect and have expected when we go to our 8 iwi partners a unified voice, and yet we've never been willing to offer that in return across our 3 councils. And I think that this is a significant step in reflecting that as a relationship we both need to put in work, and we both need to be active partners to that. And I think that for our whole community this is a really positive step forward, and one that we'll look back on very fondly in future years. We haven't always been the best at partnership. I'm sure there will be future challenges, but I just want to acknowledge all the work that's gone into this and all the work that needs to continue to go into this on a daily basis in each of our individual mahi, to bring this partnership to life in the absolutely beautiful way I know it can be. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora, Rohan, and I love the connection of the Deputy Mayor being on the Waitangi Treaty Grounds on the day in which we are debating this. It has a lovely connection with it. I'm now going to ask Councillor Paki, would you like to make your, as the seconder, you can...
Kia ora, Mr Mayor. Do we have anyone else? Because I'd love to go last. It's always
I might ask you to give the last speech prior to... Would that be in accord?
That would be fine.
Okay, so the right of reply, he'll do a far better job than the mover. And so Kahu will take that side. Councillor Courtney.
Mai, haramai. Thank you, Mayor Nick, for this opportunity. And I want to indicate at the outset that I support you signing of this agreement, this partnership agreement, Tita Ihu. And it is, as you say, a remarkable achievement to have 8 iwi and 3 councils and Tita Ihu who are prepared to come together in this Tita Ihu partnership agreement. The partnership agreement, as we know, is an aspiration document, no question about that, which establishes a vision, principles, protocols, and practices. Plus, it's the implementation too. It's hoped of a pathway or pathways on how we are going to work together to achieve better outcomes with our communities. This partnership agreement recognises the importance and uniqueness of the roles that both iwi and councils play in the areas of culture, social, environmental, and economic well-being of Tita Ihu, and seeks importantly to weave together these aspirations, because we are the waves of the same sea. We are the leaves of the same tree and the flowers of the same garden. Menek, when people have the freedom to define their own path, as we're doing here today, with this agreement, they thrive and they heal. But remembering above all else, equality is at the heart of all human rights. The day that we, Menek, can walk in others' shoes, will then understand their journey. Therefore, beyond this agreement, what we need to see from councils and Tita Ihu is more listening, more learning, greater understanding, and respect to achieve reconciliation, cooperation, and a true partnership. So let's put these words into action and honour them. The time has finally come. The time has finally come. Our partners, Menek, have been patient, very patient, and understanding with us for 180 years. Thank you. I support the recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Courtney. Other contributions? Councillor Skinner.
Thank you. I'll take this opportunity just to throw down a bit of a challenge, because this is about a relationship. It's about being frank, and that's part of that respect. There's a lot of relationships here at the table already, regardless of your iwi or not of iwi backgrounds. I see school teachers here from my previous life. I see friends that kick a soccer ball with or against. And as you know, many of us have grown up, all of us are growing up here today. And I see all as family, brothers and sisters, and sometimes as brothers and sisters you have a bit of a tiff with. But as much as I am very supportive of this partnership and dialogue, I also fear that sometimes it's taking a step backward, because as I said before, I view everybody in this town, whether you get on or not, as brothers, sisters, family, and some are literally a family. And when we talk about this partnership, it's a danger, and I see it happening in the last few months. It suddenly becomes us versus them mentality, rather than us and us building a bridge. We're not on two wakas, we're on one waka or one boat. We've always been on one boat. We sometimes paddle out of sync, but having these discussions that we're at the moment, we can then make that call to paddle into sync and go in the right direction. Where I'm just going to throw down that challenge is, I've noticed and been disappointed in the last few months when we've often had these well-meaning iwi partnership workshops and meetings, and suddenly there's comments thrown out about white male, etc. And that doesn't build relationships. That is sort of humiliating and disrespectful. As you know, we've all got parents from various backgrounds. I take great respect in my parents, great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents who came over on whatever boat they came over to settle here, as much as my grandfather who was an iwi in Whanganui. So what I'm just showing this challenge as part of this, and I'm being upfront, and please take it the right way, is that there's a respect at the table that we can continue, that we don't use a situation of the partnership as two sides challenging each other for a common ground. We are a common ground, but we will talk very openly, and that respect, I think, has to be improved. And I just point out that with a previous workshop, there were comments there, and it probably wasn't meant the way it came out, but talking about a diversity or too many white males at the table. We're all from this country, and I respect, and that's a strength of our culture. There's such a wealth of and gold from those from Māori background, Pacifica background, from European background, and I think we obviously there's areas to improve those relationships, but I just offer that challenge that we improve some of that dialogue from both sides, and that we're all brothers and sisters battling the same ocean. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Skinner. Other comments? Councillor Rollo.
Thanks, Nick, and kia ora, thank you. Man, someone must be watching down on us, because how appropriate after the week that we have had in our country, where we've got a government that are creating a radical plan that is, literally dividing our country. We here as a council, a part of Te Tai Ihu, can, create a partnership. And I think that is so important. And I've heard words today, recommitment, focus on the future. And then my colleague here on the left reminds us of something that we heard in our first month of council, and it was, why don't you come join us in the Waka? And, it's been an interesting year as a first-term councillor, because we see everything that's going on, and there's always the conversation, we've got to get the iwi involved. We haven't got them involved, they're too busy, but we've never had the question, why can't we join the iwi? And what we have here is a partnership that's, it's a lot of words, but what a partnership is actually, it's us coming together, it's the people, hei tangata, hei tangata, hei tangata. And, it's such a shame that we can't do this in an environment, maybe on the marae with our other two councils, and create a real partnership. And I'm sure we'll all be told it's an operational thing, and simply getting all those people in a room is impossible. And I think we can take some learnings from that actually a real partnership includes everyone. And so long may we have our other two councils become a part of the conversation as well. I look forward to joining you in the Waka. And, I think we often forget we live in the centre of New Zealand. Te Tai Ihu is the centre of New Zealand. And while we have a country that, quite likely may be divided at the moment, we as councils and as iwi can all come together and actually show the government, this is how partnership works, and this is how the people do it. So thank you for having the patience to wait out and see council just do their thing. I can't wait to get in the Waka with you and see where you take us, and you lead the way. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Rollo. Any further contributions? Councillor Sanson.
Thanks, Mayor Nick, through the chair. Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm only going to speak really, really briefly, obviously in support of this partnership agreement, wholehearted support. I just want to acknowledge the iwi representatives who are in the room today, ngā rangatira. And I think to say that, just echoing so many of the comments from my colleagues, that this is a significant day and a significant document partnership that we're supporting, made more so by the context within which we are currently, as a country. So I think that this document and the partnership that it will bring to life amongst, the three councils, the 8 iwi of Te Tai Ihu, I hope that this will be a beacon for other councils and communities around Aotearoa on how to walk a path of honourable partnership, honouring Te Tiriti together. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Sanson. Now call on councillor Pakipaki.
Ai ngā mana i ngā reo, ngā reo rangatira mā. At a time when the work that has been achieved by many of you in this room is being sought to be unravelled by the whims of a convincible public, this mahi is a reassuring sign that not all is lost, and I would be so bold to say it's something to celebrate. To consolidate the relationship under this agreement is a constructive step for our organisations to develop a working model that does not place an unacceptable burden on each other. Johnny mentioned an alignment and recommitment to a relationship that already exists. It would be unfair to suggest that this is a first step, and the statement reminds us that we stand on the shoulders of giants. Some of them are actually in this room today. So this is not to say there's a lot of work to do. I kind of think of it as where I've been carving a hoia this week. Hoia is a paddle that's used obviously on a waka, and we talk a lot about this waka. There's another type of hoia as well, which is a hoia uringi, and the uringi is the one that is the navigator or the person who actually steers the waka. And the one that I've been carving this week is the hoia uringi, and I think it's really fitting that I've been able to be involved in that. And that is the analogy for what we are at the moment. We're all giving each other an opportunity to put our hand on the steering oar of the waka to be able to collectively find out where we're going. I may not be here in future years serving the Māori ward in this particular seat, but it's important that the hard mahi, that the hapori Māori here in Te Tauihu has this valuable conduit that is not only for the Māori community, but also for the wider community to be able to access iwi and council. That's how conduits work. If a diverse council of 30 individuals like ourselves can work our way through some of the very difficult topics that we find ourselves facing, it's not that impossible that this model of 11 can't do the same. We may not always agree on the details as we travel, but we can set ourselves firm that the journey will continue and that we will all be on the same waka to the same destination. So this gives me great confidence that despite the tide shifting in Wellington, that all our waka in Te Tauihu are tethered together, and that as such, we will rise together. Hoi anō, ko te whakatauki o te rā, he kōtuku re ringa tahi. Nō reira, toitu te tiriti, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ame.
Sure. I've had previously indicated a request for a personal vote, and I'm going to take that request as there. And so I've now asked the Chief Executive to conduct a personal vote on the 3 resolutions in our agenda that receives the report, approves the drafts, and authorises myself to be able to sign the partnership agreement with our 8 top of the South iwi. The Chief Executive, please now cast a vote.
I was just hoping to get Rohan back. I see we've got Matty back on. Oh, we've got Rohan. Excellent. So we've got everybody in. Great. So voting on 3 recommendations all taken together. Councillor Pakipaki.
Aye.
Councillor Rollo.
Aye.
Councillor Anderson.
Aye.
Councillor Sanson.
Yes.
Aye.
Councillor Stallard.
Aye.
Councillor Hodgson.
Aye.
Councillor Rainey.
Aye.
Councillor Skinner.
Aye.
Councillor Brand.
Aye.
Councillor Courtney.
Aye.
Councillor Benge. Aye. Deputy Mayor O'Neill Stevens.
Aye.
Mayor Smith.
Aye. Can I just can I just check on one issue of standing orders? Is it automatic that members such as Rohan and Matty can vote remotely, or is there a motion
Yes,
that automatically occurs?
That's why I had to get them on screen. But
you had to see them. But I'm still learning the ropes of the place. I have great pleasure and declared the motion passed unanimously. I would ask that we may stand and sing Te Araha, and I'd ask for others to sing loudly. Otherwise, it will not be pleasant from my mic.
Tēnā tātou.
Councillor.
Tēnā tātou e te kauni hira kei kone. I didn't speak before because I wanted to wait for the vote. About 45 years I've been going between Marlborough, Nelson and Tasman District Council. And I've been talking to many who said one day this will happen. And today is the day that Nelson City Council have supported our dream of bringing all of the councils together, the councillors and the iwi. Because as an iwi, we're not going anywhere. We're going to be here in 150 years, in 1,000 years, we will still be here. There are different shapes of waka. You have double hull waka, and they were the waka that brought our people here. And then we have the single hull waka. But today we have the double hull waka. And that is more secure for going through rough waters. And it's not going to be easy. The relationship is not going to be easy all the time. And that will test our resolve with respect to our relationship. And so, you know, I remember standing here with people like Janice Manson and Jim Elkington, and their dream was for us to hop in the same waka and move together. And so I've witnessed that today after 45 years. So our dreams and our ambitions of working together, you have just made that decision. So I want to acknowledge all of you, Mayor, Nick, and our councillors here for taking that vote and making our journey a starting journey. And we will make sure that the ihu of our waka slices through the water. Not just for us, but for all of us. For my granddaughter and the generations to come. So nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Kia ora tātou koutou.
Iwi oe tātou tātou e. Te tera mai nā iwi oe tātou tātou e. Pai a te marangatanga me te aro ai ngā iwi kia potahi, kia potahi rā tātou tātou e. Tātou tātou e. Council is adjourned for morning tea. Would love our iwi guests to join with us, and I'd also note the formal signing, subject to the other council approvals, is to occur at the Tuhinanui Beach Centre next Tuesday. Council's resumed. Can I just thank fellow councillors for the way in which the previous item was dealt with. It's funny, having been an ex-parliamentarian, there were some days when I was an MP and I was just sort of kind of frustrated, and the mood of Parliament was that you were embarrassed to be a parliamentarian, and there are other days of which the place really felt like it was serving its nation well. That felt to me like one of those moments as a council, that there was a respectful, constructive debate, and of which made me feel proud to be the mayor of the team of people around this table as we dealt with that issue. And I would particularly compliment the contributions that we had from Councillor Pakipaki on that last item. We now move to item 8, the review of development contributions. And I invite Mandy and Martin to the table for presenting the report on these contributions and the policy, draft policy.
Thank you, Mayor Nick. As the report has been circulated and read, councillors will note there are very few changes proposed because, in essence, the implementation of the development contribution from 2021 is working well. So I'll hand over to Martin to make any comments.
Kia ora koutou, ko Martin Kaczynski tako ingoa. Hello, I'm Martin from the City Development team. I'm here to present this draft policy for your approval today. I just wanted to point out one correction that I noticed getting ready for this meeting. On page 104 in the draft policy, I've listed a figure incorrectly under the neighborhood reserves. So that table has an incorrect number, but I'll just point you back to what I've written in my report as having the correct neighborhood reserve value. So in the appendix, it says 15,960, but it should read 12,246. And then I'll also just draw our attention to an amended resolution 4, which is basically acknowledging that the LTP process is ongoing. There will likely be changes which will then lead to our development contribution amounts changing as well. So this just allows the mayor and the CEO to approve those changes before we go out to consultation, instead of requiring me to come back and do another report to the council. Other than that, I'd like to take the report as read and open to any questions.
Any questions? Firstly, Councillor Pakipaki.
Through the chair, just on that question, the definitions I see there's a couple of them with minor changes. What's the definition of minor changes?
Are you talking about?
So with when we're talking about recommendation 4, in relation to the His Worship the Mayor and the Chief Executive will be delegated authority to approve any minor, and you just mentioned it before.
Yeah, it's just up on the.
Yep. Yeah.
Right there.
So through the chair, the question was what will constitute the minor
So
change?
give it to us in plain language rather than, so what does a minor change? Is it like grammatical stuff, or is there a budget limit?
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, what I wrote previously in resolution 4 was to basically allow minor amendments, and I've just changed the wording there to make it very clear that the mayor and CEO will be able to make changes to the tables in the back, which are basically a reflection of LTP projects. So we can change the schedule of projects in line with the LTP, but not any content in the draft policy. Just basically, we're putting in an additional project here. We're taking out an additional project there.
Yeah, because the change itself didn't actually make it all that much more clear to say exactly what that, because like the original intention to have, I guess, to have the minor amendments and then it was extrapolated on and it didn't really mean much more.
Okay. Have I answered your question? Or okay.
Councillor Stella.
Thank you, Mayor. Just looking at that table on pages 57, 58 of the agenda, that compares the contributions in this draft versus 2021. I'm just wondering, two questions. What is the basis for assessing the appropriate increase? Like what metric do you use or what comparisons? How do you assess that? And then secondly, going forward, we know we have some substantial, like all councils, increases in renewables, depreciation of assets and so on. Will the policy used currently to set the price, will that be robust or valid as we go forward? We see some quite astronomical increases.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Through the chair, basically what our process is going through every single LTP item and determining which projects have an element of growth associated to that project. And then we'll go through a secondary process where we determine how much growth should be how much of that should be paid for through the general rates or other funding sources, and how much of that should be captured through future development, and in essence, the increase in capacity in new dwellings. So there's about $1 billion in the LTP associated to growth projects, and this draft policy is accounting for about 20%, $200 million of that to be captured through development contributions. And so I guess the answer to your question is the figures in front of you is really just a reflection on what the council has put forward in its LTP, and it will either shrink or it'll rise depending on how the LTP changes in the coming months. And I guess I'll just finish by saying you're correct that most councils across New Zealand are experiencing similar escalations, including our neighbors over in TDC. So that's just the nature of how you should consider DCs are a reaction to the LTP. It's not, it doesn't drive itself. It's really just following the LTP process.
We should be open about the fact that the increase in the development contributions for residences going up by about 30%, 31 grand to 40 grand and 21 to 28 grand, does flow directly into the housing affordability equation within the city. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but we do need to be quite open that there will be commentary from those that are involved in doing housing developments saying you're driving up their costs. Now, I raised a question with officials prior to today's meeting about the issue of the Crown exemption from paying development contributions. I have no difficulty with the Crown being exempted from development contributions in a project like Bridge Street, where they're making a substantial contribution towards the infrastructure that enables that housing. I'm not going to do it today because this is a consultation document, but I do wish to, the advice I've had from officials is that the Crown has very conveniently written legislation that prohibits us from being able to take development contributions from Crown projects. But it's equally true that in some areas they choose to waiver that and to make a contribution. I'm interested in, depending on where, and the Chief Executive has made comments about the new coalition government's commitment of potentially sharing a portion of GST. And if they would do something, that will impact on my decisions in this respect. But if you're looking at Kaingora's proposed developments, they are looking at constructing over the next 5 years several hundred homes, and that amounts to several $1 million if you look at the level of these development contributions. And I will, as we go through the consultation process, like to see some words added into the document that would say that we would at least, where Housing New Zealand are doing those developments, and they have not contributed to the cost of the infrastructure, that we would ask and approach them and ask them to make such a contribution. And I suggest to you, if you look at those numbers, we are talking about many millions of dollars. And the question is the millions of dollars of that infrastructure for Kaingora developments, should that be met by the general ratepayer or should it be met by the Crown? And that's a discussion I wish to have as the discussion document goes out. Councillor Skinner.
Thank you for that. Page 60 and 61, on page 64.9, in regards to exempting iwi trusts. Just to elaborate on that, I see on page 61 we've got option 1, option 2, we amend to exempt developers iwi trusts, and then on page 62 it's more broad regarding page 59 and 60. On the second lot, that's more broad to all housing trusts. Explain. Yeah, thanks for your question. Through the chair, the first proposed change there in regards to iwi trusts is following through from a previous resolution that this council passed in December 2022. That so basically, if we're looking to make an exemption to our policy, we need to take a report to council, and a report was taken to council for an iwi trust to receive an exemption. And that was approved, and then another resolution was put onto that to say, please, next time we're reviewing the policy, let's add iwi trusts that are building social housing to our exemptions list. So that is the first change that I've indicated in the report. The second change that I've indicated in the report is basically to clarify that sometimes there will be situations where Kāinga Ora or the Crown or other community housing providers will opt not to develop on their own behalf, but to buy market housing from a private developer. And the policy wasn't clear around whether or not that social housing was also exempt. So that second proposal is basically saying if you are a private developer that is building social housing on behalf of one of these groups, you will also be exempt. And the benefit of making it very clear in our policy that that is an exempt activity is it gives our partners, for instance, Kāinga Ora, the opportunity to say, we know that you're saving $28,000 per unit. We'd like to negotiate a below market rate price on these units. So that's what that additional exemptions meant to.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And I see that referred to just under 4.5 that we resolved in 2022. That was like a one-off, and that was a one-off, was it? And that we proposed to have it considered as more than a one-off. And that's where we are today. You're putting it in for our consideration today and to go out to consultate.
So the original resolution directs officers to make the amendments during the next review, which is where we are now.
Okay. So on that, we've got exemptions for iwi trusts, but we could and can have those exemptions for whatever trust for community housing.
Can you just clarify, as I understand the exemption that is being proposed is specifically for social housing. So if we take a development like Mahitahi in the Maitai, an iwi partner is involved in that, but it is normal commercial housing, so it would get development contributions. But if they were involved in a social development similar to the Nelson Tasman Housing Trust or Habitat for Humanity, then the policy would say that they would automatically qualify exemptions. Am I interpreting the proposed policy correctly?
Through the chair, correct, that you either need to be on that community housing providers list, which is a set based on certain criteria, or a iwi trust building social housing specifically, not commercial housing.
Yeah, so I think the mayor's touched on, so if we've got it for exemption for those who are doing community housing, and we've also got an exemption for those iwi trust doing community housing, why have that as an exemption? Because if whether you're an iwi trust or not, you already get an exemption for community build.
Maybe I can just respond to that through the chair, that our current policy lists and names those organisations, right? So it doesn't just say social housing, community housing people, so it's specific.
As in like Habitat Humanity or so forth?
Yes, or the Nelson Tasman Housing Trust. So that's why we need to also name iwi trusts within that list.
and we're not already got, so I'm not trying to be difficult, but we're already enabling community trusts. Why are we specifically saying iwi? I'd have thought.
I think I can provide part of the explanation for that as the author of the community housing legislation. The community housing legislation provides for people to register as a CHIP, a community housing provider. Iwi, this is to deal with an iwi that is not a registered CHIP, and few of them would be, providing they were doing social housing, and is quite appropriate. I've got a more tricky question, and I'm not sure the answer.
Sorry if I can sort of tag onto that.
Yeah.
Then they should become a CHIP, like any other organisation. There seems to be, if you're a trust, there's all sorts of trusts out there. To qualify like everybody else, then you would fulfil those requirements. But we're giving an exemption without fulfilling those requirements.
I think you underestimate, Councillor Skinner, the amount of work that's required to be a registered community housing provider. It is quite an extensive regulatory requirement, and in my view, the iwi trusts have their own regulatory requirements under a number of different statutes. The only thing I do wonder about, and I don't want to be controversial, is the intention. My view is that we've got, reinforced by the partnership agreement, we have a partnership agreement with our 8 local iwi. Is the wording of this such that any iwi trust from anywhere in New Zealand would be exempted? And should we, just a question, should we be limiting the exemption in the development contribution to our 8 tangata whenua iwi trusts?
Thank you, Mayor Nick. That is an interesting question. The reason we've got these exemptions is to encourage the provision of social housing for Nelson. I don't see it matters how we get there, and this is what the proposed changes are enabling that to happen, no matter who actually signs up for it. So that is something that we can further look into, and it'll be interesting to see what comes back after the consultation occurs. But as long as we're getting that outcome of social housing.
I would be interested for staff to have a discussion with Pania, with local iwi, and to see what document. I'm going to support the document of the report and your recommendations, but in the consultation process, I'd be interested in a conversation with our local iwi as to whether they have a preference. Councillor Sanson.
Just following on from Mayor Nick's question, with registered community housing providers, do we differentiate between whether they are local, as in Nelson Tasman Housing Trust or Habitat for Humanity, versus national? So if there is a community housing provider that's registered, that's building housing in Nelson, does the exemption apply to them? I'm just curious. Do we have any others? I know there are other social housing providers that are registered. I'm just curious as to whether the waiver applies to them as well.
Where's the words? I can't remember if it just says, it does list them, but it does also talk about chips generally. When you raise that question, that brought to mind the policy doesn't differentiate between profit and not-for-profit chips.
I think both those are good questions.
So at the moment, the community housing providers, we're not talking iwi trusts, basically there's no restriction on them being local or national, profit, not-for-profit. So maybe it's something that we need to do a little bit more thinking about through this consultation as to whether we
through the chair, happy to have that thinking, but the focus was to get the social housing for Nelson.
100%.
The outcome focus. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure that we should be restricting it just to local iwi unless local iwi think we should, just because I'm aware, for example, there's Ka Uru Ora, which is a national iwi organisation that has 5 local iwi signed up to it, but still has a kind of national presence. So we wouldn't want, for example, those to be, social housing to be restricted here for the 5 iwi who've signed up to it because it's a national entity. Yeah. So it's kind of getting becomes quite complicated if we're looking to try and restrict it too much.
I was going to suggest a way forward, but I'll take Councillor Benjes. My inclination on these questions, which I think are quite interesting, and that is, should the development contributions be for profit and non-profit? Should they be for local and national? And the questions that I've raised around the Crown. I don't want to change it. It's going out in a consultation document. But I would like our staff that are working on this area to give those issues some thought. And when we come back through the consultation process, perhaps give us a bit more thought as to whether there's some nuance that's required in that area would be my preferred way forward. I think they're good questions, but it's a consultation document and that's the right time for those being teased out. Councillor Benj.
Thank you, Mayor Nick. Now, I'm trying to be a good councillor. Is this questions or debate? Or what are we doing here? Are we just talking in general? We're not.
We're doing questions on the report around the development contributions.
And then we'll talk about it more afterwards.
Then I'm going to take a mover and a seconder when we've finished a bit of informal discussion.
All right.
Although with this item, my bit of a hope would be that it's reasonably straightforward and there wouldn't be too much debate, with me being reasonably slack.
Well, I have some questions.
But sure.
My understanding is that I've talked to Habitat for Humanity and had a look at some of the things that they've done. Those people are buying those houses. Is that right? Can they sell them?
Through the chair, my understanding of Habitat for Humanity is they do both long-term rentals and the rent-to-own scheme, at which point, once they own them in the 20 years, perhaps, then yes, they can sell them.
Can I just add, I'm sorry to add information, know quite a lot about it as the draft of the legislation. To be registered as a CHIP, every trust has to have a wind-up clause, and the regulations require that the wind-up clause has those housing transferred over to an alternative community provider, so that if Habitat for Humanity or the Nelson Tasman Housing Trust in 20 years' time was wound up, to be a registered CHIP, they have to have a provision that says that those houses, if they were wound up, would be continued to be used for social housing and community housing purposes.
So are you saying you can't sell them?
No, it's more complicated than that, because let's say you are the Nelson Tasman Housing Trust. They may choose to sell one house and build 2 others. So it's not so rigid as preventing them from selling houses. So what it says is that their overall portfolio, if at any time in the future they decided to wound up, is that the asset base must be used for community and social housing purposes.
But people can buy one and people can sell it. And I presume that would be the same whether iwi or anybody built them. They would be able to be bought and they would be able to be sold. That's my question. Can they be bought and sold? The answer appears to be yes.
Yes, but not without conditions. So I'll give you an example. Habitat for Humanity, when they sell a house, and they do, have conditions in the sale and purchase agreement that if ever in future that family wanted to sell the house, they have to offer it back to Habitat. So it's more complicated. It is not absolute, because it depends on each of the individual housing providers. A number of them do have those clauses that in the event that they support someone into home ownership, the person then owns the home and they want to sell, a number of those social and community housing providers have a clause that you must offer it back to the community housing provider.
Sure, but it is possible for them to build a house, sell it, take the money, do another one. So they can be bought and sold in one way or another. And Habitat Humanity might do that, but you also said that Tasman Housing Trust, they will build houses and sell them and use the profit and the capital.
No, I'm not misrepresenting the Nelson Tasman Housing Trust. They may sometime in the future, and I do not know they've ever had, but they at some time in the future may own a property and actually feel it doesn't meet their portfolio, it may be old, it may have a requirement for significant maintenance, and may sell that property and buy out other property, just as Housing New Zealand, Kāinga Ora and others do. To date, I don't think, and somebody who may be more familiar with Nelson Tasman Housing Trust, they've bought up a portfolio of 56 houses to date, and I don't think they've sold one yet.
Well, what about the government then? Can
when
they
I was-
sell a house?
Yes, when I was Minister of Housing, and the portfolio was 63,000 houses, every week Housing New Zealand was buying and selling houses.
Okay. So, and so they could be bought and sold. And my question was, can I become a provider? Can I become a provider? A chip? Or whatever it is. And Nick's comment was that, well, it might not have been you, Nick, but someone said it's a huge amount of work. Huge amount of work.
Yeah, through the chair, yeah, if you wanted to become a provider, you need to register. And that is a process. I'm not familiar with.
What's the huge amount of work? Well, for instance, you need to be able to satisfy the regulator, which is within MB, that you've got good tenancy management, that you've got good governance, that you've got a strong balance sheet. You're required by law to rent your properties at least 20% less than the market value. You're required to ensure that if you ever sell the properties, that they're reinvested in housing. There's a whole lot of regulatory requirements of that sort. My understanding is that there are about 38 registered chips nationwide, and MB looks after regulating and making sure that they are well run.
So is the government a chip? Or are they just the government?
No, it's not, because Kāinga Ora has its own legislation.
And they can buy and sell. So in actual fact, if we made it substantially cheaper, we could be the social housing for New Zealand, not just Nelson.
I've got the website.
Hey?
To the chair, I've got the website up. No, we can't, because local authorities and council controlled organisations are excluded from registration as a chip. Those are the two conditions.
Correct.
Kāinga Ora and local body.
So you take Christchurch owned a very substantive portfolio of social housing. They quite deliberately chose to transfer that housing into a chip so that they would both be covered by the regulations and would have access to provisions such as this. And in my view, and I wasn't there, when the Nelson City Council made a decision to sell its community housing, one of the other alternatives would have been for the Nelson City Council to form a chip. It chose instead to sell its housing to Kāinga Ora. Well, I think I do want to keep the discussion quite focused on the consultation documents around the DCs.
But if another person, well, if you're simply adding iwi, which is another provider.
What we are proposing to do is to go out and consult on a development contributions policy that exempts particular parties from paying development contributions, and it includes iwi trusts where they're doing social housing. And that's what we asked officials to do. They've done exactly it. I think there's a little bit of questions around the edge, and I think we've got a process forward for dealing with those. Councillor Paki, then Councillor Sanson. Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor James. You're giving some helpful. Yeah, I get worried when you use that particular point. It makes the chair very nervous. James.
It was on that, and a question around progressive home ownership or developments that are intended for progressive home ownership. Do they qualify for an exemption under the social housing exemption or not? I'm thinking of like the likes of the one in Stoke that was recently done behind Elam Church.
As long as it's through an organisation that's a chip, then they can be.
I have another question that's on a different topic. Is it good to kind of segue into? It was just back to that. You made a comment, Martin, about the 20% kind of value capture through development contributions of the growth predicted in the LTP. Is that, to your understanding, kind of quite a standard across Aotearoa, or is there quite a variation? You know, some councils 40%, some councils 10%, and if so, kind of what lands us in this 20% area?
Thank you. Through the chair, it really depends on the nature of the projects. So I haven't looked at what's going on in Tasman, but where you're expecting to see a lot of projects that are exclusively for growth, such as sending a big wastewater line out to a new subdivision, that would be considered a much higher proportion of growth cost. So it doesn't make sense to charge someone in Richmond extra rates in order to fund the pipe out to somewhere in Hope, for instance. Don't mean to pick on TDC, but so if your LTP is very heavily focused on these massive growth projects, then you would. Is that from?
That's an excellent.
Okay, then you would potentially see more than 20% proportion captured, but as a kind of standard, and the financial modeling we use does aim to try and get it into that 20% area.
Can I just ask a follow-up? I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. So when we look at kind of infrastructure investment in the LTP, and we have, renewals and then the growth portion and then increased level of service. So that growth portion, is that roughly, is that 20%, and that equates to the development contributions, or is 20% of that growth portion kind of estimated to be covered by DCs?
It's the first one. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Mayor Nick, through the chair. So I'm happy to move, but I just wanted to ask a question of staff. Through the document, there are options, like the preferred option. So if I just move the recommendations, does that capture the preferred option, or do you need me to go through and say the preferred option? Because it was just it's not super clear from the document.
Through the chair, I would imagine that if we agree the document, then we're going to preferred options. Yeah.
Okay.
Exceptions to policy. It's referred to there. I don't have it. Sorry, excuse me. Just give me a copy.
So I'm happy to move the recommendations with the preferred options in the as outlined in the report, and the amendment here, number 4, around the changes, those will be changes that happen to the consultation document before it goes out. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm comfortable with all of that, happy to move it all.
Sorry, I just required a document that I didn't find in my papers. I just needed to get that clarified. Can I just check in the last question from Councillor Sanson? If we pass those resolutions in those 4, I'm assuming that we're supporting the recommendation around the preferred option in the report. Is that correct?
That's what I asked, I think.
We're agreeing the third option of the report? Is that what you said?
My question is, if we adopt the 4 resolutions that have been drafted for us with the amendments, does the consultation document include, as in the report, the preferred option?
Through the chair, correct. The draft consultation document, which is attachment 2, is outlining the 3 proposed changes. So if they weren't approved, we would need to change that consultation pack before it goes out.
Good as gold. We've had the report and the recommendations moved by Councillor Sanson. I understand Councillor Hodgson is happy to second those. I'm sorry, is there a further question that I've missed, Aaron? Oh, I'm sorry, Maddie.
Yeah, thanks, through the Mayor. Just a question about the Te Ture Whenua Māori Act. How much weight does that have? Is it a nice to have, or are we actually bound to act in a certain way?
Through the chair, it requires all local governments to adhere, and it specifically mentions in the Act that development contributions are one of the policies.
Yeah, and also just given we just had saw some iwi partnership stuff, so there wasn't any consultation with Māori around this document. Is there do you think once we've got that partnership, that's something we're going to start seeing in some of these proposals? It seems it has quite a bit to do with that community.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Through the chair, we acknowledged that the appendix said that there weren't any direct consultation taken in this place, but we have made them aware through a forum this week that these changes are coming, and generally the feedback has been that this is a good news story, and we're also taking it to a workshop in March when all staff are back to essentially present these changes. And I think what's important to acknowledge is that this is a first step in acknowledging where we're at with this policy, and there's room to evolve in the future as needed.
Yeah. Any further questions or comments? The motion's been moved and seconded. Councillor Stella.
Thank you, Mayor Nick. Just kind of following up on Councillor Benja's earlier questions. I guess if we're exempting development contributions from a development that is social housing, and if that social housing can be sold to a tenant, and then the tenant has the freedom to sell onto the open market, it no longer is there at that point. No longer social housing, it's commercial housing. And we've heard that some providers have, in the sale of purchase agreement, a proviso that if a purchaser wishes to sell it, they must sell it back to the provider. But do we have anything in our strategy or documents or this document that safeguards, that ensures that if we are going to exempt it, it doesn't change from social to commercial housing after 1 year or 5 years? Do we have a universal safeguard against that happening? Because we wouldn't want that to happen, because then we've subsidized, we've wasted our money essentially.
Through the chair, one of the aims of this policy is to be clear and administratively simple and straightforward. And there is no tool other than having a staff member watching Trade Me to see these houses come up in order to observe that sale. So the answer is no, we don't have a safeguard in place to try and capture that. And I guess we haven't done an analysis of the risk of your scenario happening. But for the most part, this policy is meant to capture 99% of the situations, and there will always be that gray area. But there isn't a clear way of capturing that, as you've mentioned.
So just as a quick follow-up, I know we've asked you to look further at profit and not-for-profit providers and so on. I wonder, when the exemption is granted for a certain social housing development, there must be some kind of an agreement or something signed. I wonder if staff could look at including in the agreement that the provider has those safeguards in their contracts with the tenants that ensure it stays social housing. Would that be a simple way to act as to provide this safeguard for a period of years, perhaps, and it doesn't go into the commercial market?
Through the chair, we're happy to have that thinking, but I guess again the outcome focus of getting the social housing there in the first place helps that sort of supply meeting the need, and then what happens after that, if is a little bit immaterial, because we've got that social housing need sorted.
Okay.
Yeah, look, I think this has been a really good discussion, and we'll go away and do some more thinking around on some of these things you've talked about. But I wouldn't want it to become too prescriptive, because as Mandy says, we want the social housing to happen. The minute you start writing these specific things, a lot of you come to us and say we want to speed up this development, and if we put in place things to stop it, I've worked with the Chips before in a previous role, and I have to say that the bar to become a Chip is really high. They've got constitutions, they've got a desire to build social housing. They don't want to build houses that are going to be sold on Trade Me. They don't, and we're working. We've got it, and we've we've put in a partnership with iwi this morning, which is to talk about trust and partnership. And I believe working with CHIPS is the right thing to do. They're really good organisations, and we should do that on the basis of trust and partnership. I don't think we should become restrictive in taking this forward. But the conversation is good. I think.
Good advice. Councillor Skinner.
Thank you. So we're making exemptions, and I support that if it's equal across whatever organisation. But as soon as you throw in some exemptions, someone else is paying more. So one person building a house get an exemption, then the other person building a house, which adds to the community, would be paying more. That's correct. I'll take the nod as a correct.
Through the chair, yeah, that's correct.
And the other one, just to indicate my support or non-support when it comes to the vote, I support us making it easier, cutting red tape. But if we're making exemptions, I feel if you're going to make exemptions for all community housing, not just iwi trusts, with those who are hitting the regulatory safeguards with CHIPS. But are we saying by being an iwi trust, you don't have to hit those regulatory safeguards because you're an iwi trust over another trust?
Yeah, the perspective I take on this is that you've got your very heavily regulated CHIPS.
Well, just after a question, sorry to ask, after answer a question rather than opinion on that. Because the debate would be a great time for that. But so what I'm saying is, you make exemptions. I've got no problem making exemptions for those community housing, and as you pointed out, fully aware there's a lot of work making that. There's reasons for that, the CHIPS. So you hit those regulatory. So if we make exemptions for one group, quite a different exemption for another group. What I'm saying is, iwi trusts, we're enabling them to forego the contributions without having to fulfil the regulations and safeguards.
I know you,
which is different to another.
Sure, you cut me off because you felt I was expressing an opinion.
Well, I'm asking an officer. Sorry, I'm asking an officer advice here. Thank you.
So through the chair, the policy has for some time given them an exemption to CHIPS who provide social housing. This new insertion about iwi trusts is really about honouring that partnership that we signed today, honouring the principles of the treaty. We are giving iwi trusts a development contribution waiver to enable them to build homes on land that they may have received back in the treaty settlements. We're enabling them, we're making up for historic redress by enabling them to make homes for their whānau on iwi land in a more affordable way. I don't think that that process needs to be governed by the same rules and regulations as the CHIP.
So we're having different rules, one rule for an iwi trust and a different rule for a non-iwi trust.
I think we're getting into a debate rather than questions
Will there be a question
of our staff.
Be a question, is that what, it seems black and white to me that that's what we're doing, but I might be missing something.
They're two different exemptions for two different purposes.
Two different exemptions for two different groups.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to thank staff for their report. I am going to emphasise that this is approval of a draft for consultation, and that there's further opportunity, and the resolutions for putting this document out to consultation are before us, and it's now open to debate. It's been moved and seconded. I support it. I think there are some iterations that we may want to explore a bit further with the consultation. I think the key for me is that the exemption in respect to the debate for the iwi trusts is only where they are doing social housing, that those iwi trusts have a substantive regulatory compliance responsibility, and to only allow them to be able to exempt the exemption if they're a CHIP, in my view, would be excessively restrictive. Thus, my support for the recommendations. It's open to debate. Councillor Bench.
I feel uncomfortable about this because somebody has to pay. And not because we're adding another provider. And it makes no difference whether it's a not-for-profit or a for-profit organisation. I mean, not-for-profit just means that you don't make any money, but you keep putting them money back into more housing. And all that's good. But the comment that who it's sold to and what happens to them afterwards is immaterial. It just isn't true. And And personally, I think the best part of what I've seen of these housing schemes is that it provides people who could, everyone should have the right to own a home, and it provides people with a pathway to rent to buy. And I think that part for me, it gives hope, because you talk to 20 or 30-year-olds and the hope of ever owning a house, most of them don't even have it. But I'm just not sure that this is the right tool. And it worries me that we've gone, well, we've done it for these guys, so we'll do guys, and maybe the next ones that come along. I can imagine a world where we don't have a shortage of social housing. I hope we're going to get there, not too far away. But all that stuff has to be paid for by somebody, and you can't. I mean, it's the same people. There's not other sources of getting the money to pay for it. They don't really exist. And yeah, I'm just uncomfortable with it worded this way, that it goes on forever. And it could become a method of selling houses cheaper than what anyone else can build them. These people could become the only provider of houses. So I'm not sure that I'd like to feel confident that it's been thought through a little more, a few more ideas of other ways of rewarding those who make social housing than the waiving the contributions.
Thank you. Other contributions? Councillor Hodgson.
Yeah, I'm supportive of the policy and definitely of the direction that it takes around trying to support social housing. I think if you ask me, what I'm really supportive of is our 3 local GIPs and our iwi trusts, who, when they're resourced, we know that resource remains serving that purpose within our community as in an enduring basis for generations to come. Where I'm slightly less comfortable, I mean, if you ask me, at the end of the day, housing is housing when it's being built. So when we talk about chips from outside of Nelson, or I suppose potentially iwi trusts from outside of Nelson, that housing will be built, but it could come and go in that kind of social housing sense. And so that's, I like that we've had a discussion around just talking about refining some of those definitions. I also think about social housing, I know is quite a specific definition, and I'm not sure if it fully captures affordable housing and progressive home ownership. I think the intention might be that it does, but I want to be 100% sure on those definitions. So supportive of the policy. I think that some great work's gone into this, but encouraging to look into those things a little bit closer.
Thanks, Councillor Hodgson, Chair of our Housing Task Force. Councillor Sansom.
Thanks, Minik. I just signalling I'd like to speak last, if that's okay, if there's any other councillors wishing
As
to
the
speak.
mover, you have that right to reply, and I'll ensure you that's exercised. Any other contributions? Councillor Pakipaki, and then we'll wrap up with Councillor Sansom.
Kia ora. It's actually appropriate, I think, that the flavour of the angles that certain people take it to criticise this echoed within our central government rhetoric that they have at the moment. I would like for us to acknowledge the fact that regardless how we get there, we're still providing housing outcomes, and the housing outcomes, like Councillor Hodgson just said before, that resource and that capital stays within our communities for generations. And I can say the Nelson Housing Trust, Habitat for Humanity, they do such an awesome job. And some of these chips do such a great job. We cannot guarantee that they're going to be there in 100 years, but I guarantee that iwi are going to be there in 100 years. So with that in mind, I'm supportive of this. How we get there, the opportunities that it creates, they are not going to, iwi are only just getting themselves into a position to be able to start delivering these services. They're not a threat to the whole economic status of this. And if the rest of the industry has to accommodate that, to facilitate that, I think that's a really good thing that can happen. So I'm super supportive of this, super duper. So that's my point. Nō reira.
Kia ora kahu. Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm supportive also, and agree that we do need social housing. I prefer social housing to affordable. I don't think affordable exists. They should change that name. And we're very lucky. Anyone that's going to put their hand up and do this mahi for us. I find it interesting that at the moment, if you're Māori, you can't and build social housing. You can't access draft development contributions. So yeah, I'm exemptions. So yeah, I'm supportive.
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Sanson exercising right of reply.
Thanks, Mayor Nick, through the chair. So first of all, just to acknowledge the staff, because this has actually been, I think, years of work. I think it was first raised early on in my last term and possibly before that. So I just really want to acknowledge the work of staff and how long it's taken us to get to this point. So today we're just going to hopefully approve the consultation document, then we go out to the community and then it comes back and we get to adopt it with whatever changes the community, any changes we take on from community feedback. Obviously I'm very supportive and I think we need to just be mindful that we do use development contribution waivers to try to realise various housing outcomes. So for example, we have a development contribution waiver if you want to build houses in the city centre, because we want more people living in the city centre. So I think it is absolutely appropriate that we have development contribution waivers for our community housing providers and hopefully after this process also for our iwi trust, who, as we've heard from Kahu, are likely to be holding that land and that housing for whānau outcomes for generations to come. So I encourage all elected members to support this. Thanks.
So I'm going to put the resolutions as one. Resolutions 1 to 4 as amended. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary say no. No. That's carried. I now come to item number 9 on the agenda. Invite Matt Bruce before the committee, and it's with respect to the updated delegations in respect to traffic and parking bylaws.
Thank you, Mayor Nick, and through the chair. This deals with the delegations register in regard to the new traffic and parking bylaw. It's a minor change to make sure it's up to date with the new bylaw, and this needs to be completed before we can bring in a report to a hearings panel in the new year. Happy to answer any questions.
I just wanted to make a note more broadly around delegations and are very supportive of the paper. And being familiar with delegations that are just a practical way in which things need to work within any organisation. But it also is one of those where it needs some political judgment. And I want to, for those that serve on the hearing panel around such parking bylaws, and also for the Chief Executive and staff, is where these delegations are granted and something has a substantive political moment around it, that is, there is strong public interest and contention. There is an understanding that they will be, when you delegate it down, that's to be able to get on with the work, but quite clearly if there is an issue that is substance, there is still the flexibility to bring it through to council, where the hearings panel felt that actually the issue was of sufficient moment that it justified bringing it up to that level. And that is not anything in opposition to the delegation and the paper, but just as my expectations as mayor, as how these delegations register work. And that if what we're trying to do is to avoid little issues coming to the council all the time, tying up council staff with minor issues that are perfectly capable to be dealt with by the hearings panel, but equally those that are administering it, understanding that just because the delegations exist doesn't mean that political judgment should not be exercised in saying, actually, that's a substantive issue for the community and it should go to full council. Is there any questions from councillors around the paper? I think it's very straightforward. I'm happy to move it from the chair. Seconded from Councillor Skinner. If there being no further questions or comment, I shall put the resolutions 1 and 2 delegating to the hearings panel the power to make resolutions under the Nelson City Council traffic and parking bylaw. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, say no. You should take that matter as a compliment when your report goes through so quickly. We come to the item with respect to road occupation policy. This is a recommendation for the paper for the decisions on this to be with the Chief Executive, who often will delegate it down to other staff. Happy for you to take us through the report.
Thank you, and through you, Yannick. In terms of the current road occupation policy, it's quite clear that it doesn't allow new structures on road reserve. That policy is being reviewed, and we expect later next year or in 2025 to bring that back to council for approval. In the meantime, we're seeking to delegate that to the CEO where we have exceptions. At the moment, we receive, on average, formally about 5 a year, and we think there's probably a further 5 to 10 that don't actually make it to council because they're told don't apply because it won't be approved before it comes to us. We would like to be a little bit more enabling. There are good cases where people want to build a structure like steps to get from road reserve to their property on the Port Hills. So having it delegated to the CEO would hopefully speed up that process. It would not negate the fact that they still have to go through potentially resource consent, building consent, traffic management plans, a license to occupy. There's a number of steps to still go through, but this would just help speed up that process until the new policy, hopefully next year. Happy to take any questions.
Yeah, I have a question, and I put a request through my staff because effectively what council is doing here is taking a power that is reserved with council and handing it over to staff, and it's perfectly proper. And then our job as councillors is then to determine what's the policy, what is the criteria under which those discretions should be granted. And so the recommendation number 2 makes reference to that in a previous report, that report number 28149. I apologise that I requested that at the weekend and it's only just come to my attention this morning, so I would normally have given you a heads up. The criteria that is referenced, and it is my view the criteria under which our staff exercise the delegation, is indeed a matter relevant for council. And my concern is that all 5 of the criteria are reasons why not. In my view, when you're granting the right for someone to be able to use an area of the road, you rightly have to say, well, what impact is it going to have on neighbours? What impact is it going to have on us doing our job of maintaining a road and corridor for people to get around? Is it safe, those things? But it also, in my view, is quite a valid criteria, and that is I want us to be practical. And that is that sometimes, and I have seen practical examples where a house can be built for $100,000 less if you were allowed to put a retaining wall on the road reserve that won't have any impact on anybody else. Or equally so if you're trying to get a road access to be able to put 2 houses. I've seen an example where the decision of a council official to allow or not allow a structure on the road reserve will make a difference as to whether you can get 2 houses on the property or 3 houses on the property by being practical. So what I would like us to do is to absolutely accept your report, but I would like a bullet point so that not only are you weighing up future need or use of the road reserve, protection to the existing future utilities, not unreasonable interference on neighbours, free pedestrian traffic movement, and the practicality of avoiding a structure in the road reserve. They're all good criteria, but I would also like to add a criteria that says that you will consider where it will practically assist a property owner in facilitating access and protection of their property at reasonable cost. In other words, I want our council staff to have a criteria. Now, they've got to weigh those up. But for instance, I love the criteria that says, is it practical for you to avoid putting a structure? I don't want you putting a retaining wall on the road reserve if actually you should put it on your own damn property. But there are lots of practical cases where they be stairs, retaining walls, roadways and the likes, where it's not. So my question is, would council officials be open to a further 6th criteria that is asking to be weighed up alongside those other 5, a factor that gets an element of practicality to consider where sometimes it is incredibly helpful to the property owner and may not contradict the other 5?
So yeah, certainly, yes. A lot of it comes down to practicality and the cost of doing these things, and we want to be more enabling to allow it development of land. So,
is there any other questions or discussion around the table? There are two ways forward. One would be just to give a guidance, and that is rather than me wording it on the fly, an amendment that said and asked council to draft a additional criteria taking into account the practical impacts on property owners, or whether council would prefer just to slot the wording in of something of what I saw. Is there any interest in other council's points of view about how to go forward and what your view is in respect of the perspective I've expressed? Councillor Pakapaki.
Happy for the next chair.
Sorry, through the chair. Hopefully this is not too unrelated, but will this affect or what effect will this have on the like existing structures that are unpermitted at the moment that people actually want to come to council and say, hey, we've got this example, it's a practical solution. Will the assessment criteria be as such as if it would have to meet the standards for a new structure the way that this here is, or will they be able to, or do they just leave sleeping dogs lie?
Through the chair, that's a great question. In terms of existing ones, I think when the new policy is drafted, it's certainly something to be dealt with. There are probably hundreds out there that either don't have license to occupy or don't have an agreement as such. Certainly this is just to deal with the new ones for the meantime, but we will have to go back and look at those old ones in the future.
Through you, Manik, we do have a process where we have identified old ones as they come in and that we deal with them. But the old ones are historical. They are what they are. They're there. We just need to deal with them. This is going forward.
Yeah, so I guess a supplementary to that would be you've got essentially those people who are that you would experience that the issue was about conflict. It's probably to do with neighbours complaining and they're trying to resolve some matter. The other one that I'm kind of thinking with my fairy hat on is that people are lovely and they'd like to be proactive and try and get something, that's about their property that's affecting their sales or the occupation there corrected. Do you think you'll have many of those? Or is that just a hornet's nest that people are too scared to touch? Because that's how I sort of view it at the moment.
I'm unsure that we've got many of those now.
Any other questions? Tim, sorry.
Thank you. I'm quite happy with what you've got in 4.8, those bullet points. But get us clarity. Obviously, there's all sorts of things people want to make use of that extra few yards of reserve. You're looking at, and I'm quite happy for officers to make those judgments, and I think I've been fairly flexible for minor things. But is this going to? What does that cut off? I mean, people build sheds where in the past they shouldn't. Obviously, they need permission. They might put a retaining wall where they should or shouldn't. This is more than just steps going down a bank.
Yeah, thank you. And through to the chair. A lot of this is around providing access to property. So it's generally retaining walls in relation to a driveway or timber steps to get down to your property. It's not so much around people wanting to occupy council land to have their swimming pool on, across the boundary, or it's more around access. And that's the things that officers will look at when they assess them, and would take that up to CEO to say, we don't support this, or we do support it for these reasons.
So the access way, like trying to make a driveway, a turning bay, or a retaining wall out in the council reserve, so you've got the turning area. There's a danger in that, isn't there? I'm quite comfortable what we've got, the status quo, but I'm trying to understand how this will make it easier. At the moment, if someone wants to make more of a stairway or a retaining wall, they'd have to come not just from yourself, but to the council hearing.
To the chair, correct. If you wanted to install some steps from the road down your steep property to your boundary, and that went across council land, the current policy would say that's not allowed. So officers would decline that. we would like to be in a position where we go, actually, there is merit in that. It's not going to impact those bullet points in 4.8.
Yep.
And we would take that to the CEO for approval.
I'm very comfortable with that, but also very conscious that we don't get situations where we enable some steps or some retaining wall, and then suddenly council becomes liable when it fails.
Oh, and that's Nick, that's a very, very good question. We need to be very clear that where we are going to be, and that's one of the things we need to be cognizant and aware of, is that where we do give approval through the chief executive, that the costs and ownership are clearly defined. This isn't about us making decisions where we're going to take on the liability of work by others that are going to impose a cost on council, which the new policy will address. So we need to be very clear that if you need something to get access to your property, that you will take on the full responsibility, resource consents, costs, maintenance going on in the future.
So get that totally clear. Under current policy, that doesn't give us that safeguard, but this will, or are you saying I'm comfortable?
The current policy does, but we have to bring each and every single one to council. What we're asking, until such time that we get the new policy in hand, which is potentially 2 years away, that to enable things to be able to happen, that we delegate that to the chief executive as an interim policy with some criteria.
Cool. So thank you to indicate to the chair, I'm very comfortable with what we've been proposed here without any additional detail. I think leaving it to the CEO and staff to make those decisions.
Okay. Councillor Brand.
Thank you through the chair. I'm just trying to see if this is what covers when you've got, because you talked about the common ways when you've got multiple properties up a shared driveway and the ease of access to their property, and then we've got a road reserve or something at the tail end of that that may or may not be available for parking. Would this take into account if more houses were built up this shared driveway pathway on access for the properties? Does this address the conflict of that reserve area and how we would delegate what can go there and what not, and how those property owners can or cannot access their property if there's a conflict with multiple houses now being built on sections? Does this fall under this?
Through the chair, if someone came to council and said, I would like to build on the back of my property and add a house, and to do that requires upgrading the driveway to be wider and now meet council standard, and it requires a retaining wall, that's what this would deal with. In terms of kind of disputes around access across council land or parking on council land, that wouldn't be dealt through this process.
Okay.
Would be more for the traffic and parking bylaw, for example.
So that previous one, that I'm just trying to get my head around, because we have got changes with properties being developed that do not require to provide parking on their site, and therefore the public space out front of properties becomes prime real estate, and we are to ensure that those property owners have access to their right of way. And if we've got a reserve or space at the bottom of this, say, limited, very narrow street, does this then put our mind to ensuring that the accessibility of those properties could change the delegation of what we have for that reserve? So if we need to put up a retaining wall or something, or put in bollards or something else to ensure that other people have the access on that from our right away, does this put our mind to changing what may or may not be allowed on that reserve area in that space?
Through the chair, in terms of having a structure on road reserve which allowed, say, for parking, that wouldn't generally be approved by officers. It's more around a structure that enables someone to get from the legal road reserve to physically to their property.
Okay.
There are historic cases where there's a car deck, for example, where the person can park on legal road reserve and have access down to their property.
Yeah.
those type of applications is something to be dealt with the new policy, and where the council's direction is to allow those type of structures. At this stage, it's more to enable people to get to their property and kind of speed that process up is what we're angling at.
Okay.
Okay. I'm not sure where council is with respect to my proposal. Tim's expressed some concern about it. My concern is that all of the criteria in 4.8 is negative reasons why you would say no, and I just want to have a balancing factor. If there was a general consensus around including it, that's fine, or procedurally I could formally move it as an amendment if that was the preferred approach. And so just in terms of chairing it, happy to take any questions aside to the issue that I have raised and to resolve those. Then I'd like to deal with my amendment, then the substantive motion. So are there any further questions of our staff on the substantive issues in the report? Councillor Bench.
Oh, probably could have waited.
Okay.
I agree that it should say what you can do. There should be some you can in this agreement rather than you mustn't.
Yeah.
And I'm not a big fan of the idea of us going around the town looking for everybody who may be in the wrong at some time in the future and dragging out 200 or 300 people and saying, you must do this. I'm not, you know, it'll be mainly historic houses. I don't mean historic as in on the list. I mean older buildings in our hilly areas. I'm not in favour of going and punishing all those people just because we can.
Okay, that being the case, can I just test? I will move the resolutions as amended. 1 to 4 in respect of the delegation of powers around land occupation. Is there a seconder? And that includes the amendment, Councillor Sanson. That is now open for debate. As the mover, my view is that the criteria that have been developed by staff is entirely appropriate, and those 5 considerations in 4.8 are fair. But I do explicitly want to say to the staff, I just don't want you to be the no, no, no team. Because in so many practical cases, there are areas of roads reserve that can make an enormous difference to a property owner where they've got their driveway coming out onto the road, and allowing a structure or something on the road reserve will allow safer access onto the road. There are other practical examples where they wanted to add additional house, the rules require a wider driveway. There can be instances where actually the only practical way to provide a car parking space is a structure. And through this delegating the power away from council to council officers, I think it is appropriate for council to say, yes, we want you to consider, firstly, the public interest of making sure that it's not interfering in the purpose of the road, that it's not unreasonably impacting on neighbours, that it is not going to unreasonably interfere with the rights of others for pedestrians and others. But that we also want you to consider if there is a substantive benefit to that person that has negligible impact on others. And that's what the purpose of the amendment is.
I've no problem adding that in, but I want to make it clear that the idea of this is to be facilitative of people's requests. So in other words, I want to make that clear that that's my intention of allowing these things to happen. But to give you some level of satisfaction, we are going to take into account these other things to make sure that we're not just openly letting things happen. So look, the intent is is where we can be pragmatic, make things happen, but we are going to give you a level of assurance that we will take these other things. So you can say it if you explicitly want to, but be assured this is during my tenure for the next couple of years until we write the full policy. So look, I'm going to be doing that, but you can write it in if you need to, but no.
Okay. Councillor Skinner?
Just a quick question on that. The word significantly in your thing, I can support what you're saying. I think what we've already got from officers enables, because it's saying what you can't do, and that gives the opportunity for the CEO and officers to enable everything else. But I'm concerned word significant, that might become a sticking point when some says, well, this is affecting, but not significantly. If we had it without the word significant, benefit of access or safety that does not adversely affect other parties.
The reason for adding the word significantly is that I think it materially helps the applicant, because it may have some impact on those things, and I only want the council staff to dismiss it where it significantly impacts.
My concern is the public, what person who it it helps, might think it's not significant, where the CEO staff can see significant, but I'll leave it to yourself and the CEO's judgment.
Councillor Pakipaki.
I just want to commend Nigel, through the chair and also staff. This is exactly what Nigel said he was going to do when you jumped into this chair, into this spot, and that is to try and find ways to say yes. I think this is just like, this is gold to me. This is maybe just a small step, but I think it's really neat that we are starting to look for ways to say yes, and this is a demonstration of that. The inclusion of the word, just comment on the inclusion of the word significantly. I think it gives a qualitative measure for when you're applying, some sort of assessment on it. You can then see what, because it doesn't have, if it's adversely affect other parties, that could be in a very minor way, but that would basically disqualify people. People could challenge that through the legal system. So, kia ora.
Kia ora. Councillor Benge.
I'd like to see what Nigel said put in the preamble to these, because I think it's really important that what the aim is, which is what Councillor Pakipaki is saying, that the aim is to enable. And Nigel said it more eloquently than I can, but I think a way to address it would be to put it in the preamble to those points, that the point of this is to enable those things to happen, not to punish.
Thank you. Any other comments? In exercising my right of reply on the resolution, I plead guilty to being a nerdy ex-lawmaker and have seen many decisions go to either challenged by judicial review or tested. And when you're giving a delegated power, as the council is to a council official, totally endorsed and encouraged by the comments of the chief executive. But when a council officer either says yes or no, they need to hang it on the now 6 criteria on which they make that decision. And sometimes there will be a neighbour that takes objection to that. I think it's better for us as a council in delegating the decision to be clear about what those considerations are, and for one of those considerations to be, actually, where possible, we'd like to help an applicant if he's got issues of safety or access, and that should be a relevant consideration. And that is why I'm supportive of the resolution and will now put it to council. Those in favour will say aye. Aye. To the contrary will say no. I declare it carried. We now come to the August weather event report from our infrastructure manager, Alec. And Alec, I know the storm event is some time away, but I am continuously impressed with the progress that is being made. Can I tell you the area that I'm most encouraged is when we squeezed numbers out of Alec. When you have a storm event of this size, it's inevitable that those numbers will move around. I have to say that I've been pleasantly surprised that the degree to which those numbers have moved around have not been as much as I would expect, given the degree of uncertainty of which some of the earlier estimates were made. So thank you for the report, and we look forward to the update.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I'll take the report as read. There's no changes, and thank you for those words. I do need to acknowledge the team that I've got sitting behind me. They are passionate, and we are getting on with the task of doing work. So most of the credit goes to them. In terms of the report, it's just a cleanup in terms of 2 items. I had resolution number 2 on page 158, just clearing up now that the books have closed in terms of the expenses to the end of June. And then also we were also hit with that event in May, and just closing off the books. And then I also, and this is a positive, resolution number 4, bringing forward 5.4 million from next financial year into this financial year, recognizing that the work on our 18 slips is progressing a little bit quicker than we thought, and we just need to give ourselves some breathing space to make sure that we can action those, to action that work. Just on that, there's a lot of work happening, and they're all at different stages, be they easement, be they detailed design, building consents, resource consents, ordering materials, and they're all at different stages. In terms of the other aspects of the report, I'm happy to take questions. I do note that we've got one navigator still on board, and that navigator is still a very important link between the range of services as well as the residents, and that is once again proving its absolute gold. I also give an update of the work over the last period. You will have seen the Devonish place that was opened up like a tin can has been reinstated. I'm pleased to say that Cable Bay has been tendered, and the Glen Creek and the Mai Tai Road will follow this week. And then we will, our aim is to have that all completed by the end of the current financial year. 10.1.3, I was lucky enough to be on site on Tuesday to witness the new golf course bridge being lowered into position. And that was fantastic to witness. It's just another domino that's going to fall, and it shows a tangible measure of work being undertaken. One of our slips, slip 8 at Moore Terrace, I've said it is completed. It's about 99.9% completed. And then just focusing on the additional work this financial year. That said, Menik, I will stop there and take any questions.
One question from myself. I was pleasantly surprised, because I was a wee bit grumpy, that it was one item I was unsuccessful with in getting government support for the work of the navigators. I note that we've scored $150,000 from the Department of Internal Affairs Lottery Discretionary Fund. Am I correct that Chris Hughes is the person who's helped us secure that funding, or who in the organisation deserves the credit for securing that funding and saving the ratepayer?
Oh, that is no, it's not Chris Hughes in this particular case. This is my staff, yes.
Well, whoever pulled that off, that was a pleasant surprise for me in your report. Councillor Rollo.
Thank you, and thank you, Alec. Good report. Page 60 of our agenda on the insurances area, Waka Kotahi estimated claim 10.13 million, amount received 2.46. Given there's a lot going on in the world at the moment around what Waka Kotahi's halting in terms of funding, have we got any worries that they potentially won't come to the party with that full amount that's required, or are we still holding out but I hope we'll get that money from them?
It's a good question, and to you, Menik, I think we're still confident that we will get what we asked for. I am, in the same way that everybody around the countries, be they consultants, contractors, Waka Kotahi, or council officers, have got their nose to the grindstone. So do Waka Kotahi, and we pressurising them equally from this side in terms of getting those claims done. I have been in touch with the regional manager for Waka Kotahi. There are some items that we need to move, but they understand that, and it looks like we will get some movement before the end of December. But all things can change, but all things equal, we are still hopeful and confident.
Following up from Councillor Rollo's question, that is a very small proportion of the 3.5 million that we've claimed on the council insurance, have only received 146. We are in a high interest rate environment where late money costs us money. What prospect is there for advancing that? I think if I was to read that chart, I would say NEMA has been timely, Waka Kotahi has been slow, and insurance has been very slow. Are those comments fair? And what are we doing to give a hurry up
I think those comments are fair, and as I said, we just need to appreciate that Waka Kotahi staff are also in the same space that we're dealing with, and they're not only dealing with Nelson, they're dealing with North Island, but the relationship with Waka Kotahi is good. I think the council insurance, to tell you what we're doing, both Nikki Harrison and myself meet every 2 to 3 weeks. I think it's every 3 weeks. We meet with relevant staff that are dealing with our private insurers, and we get an update. It is slow. It is painfully slow, but we understand that, and I'm not saying this is correct, but when we look at how long it took us to resolve our insurance issues in the previous event, it took us up to 5 years. So we have the staff member that's dealing with this. He's dealing with this. He's sending regular updates. There is regular communications, but it is painfully slow. I'm unsure that there's anything we can do to speed that up. It's just part of doing business, unfortunately.
Can I just make?
But it is frustrating. Yes.
Can I just make the offer as mayor? Is when staff have made best endeavours and an organisation such as our insurer or Waka Kotahi is dragging the chain, that sometimes a letter from the mayor will just get it to the top of the pile because this is costing the ratepayer money.
Noted. Yep.
Any other questions from colleagues? Councillor Courtney.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Nick. And Officer Alex, thank you for this report. What really impresses me is this 2.1 recovery is now well integrated with our embedded and embedded into our infrastructure and capital projects business unit, business as usual. That in itself is fantastic as far as the community is concerned. I just want a little bit of a light shone on Cable Bay. I got a little, when I was taking my notes from what you were saying, you said something about tenders have been let, but has work commenced on that road, and what will the condition of it be over the Christmas period?
So the tenders have been advertised. We have to, rightly so, follow Waka Kotahi's procurement procedures. Over Christmas, it will remain the status quo, I'm afraid. I remember last time there were a couple of issues in terms of following the event that we hosted at Waka Hall, where some Cable Bay residents, they asked us to look at the timing. I have had our contractor look at that timing because there is substantial waits, but there are going to be delays. We need to put out comms. We will only be awarding, I'm hopeful we'll be awarding before the Christmas break. And that work will probably start in late January, early February. And then there's a number of sites on Cable Bay. There will be disruption. We will try and work with the residents, but there will be times where the road will need to be closed. It's just the nature of the work. But over Christmas, the traffic light systems for one way will be in place.
Mr. Pollard, thank you for that. That's very helpful. So work will be commencing about what date in the new year? Do you have any idea about?
No, I don't have a specific date, but I'm hopeful towards the end of January, early February. We still have to appoint the contractor. Those are the details we need to talk when materials need to be ordered. The order, we have to wait for their methodology, see the order in which they need to undertake the works. There are some urgent sites where there's fiber optic cables that we really need to attend to. And we will be starting with that job, I would imagine, as a matter of urgency.
Thank you.
Any further? Councillor Skinner.
I'm just happy to move what we've got here, happy to receive and move.
Good as gold. Could I just have one further question, Alec? With respect to the 350 grand for the repair of the cycleways, it's great that we've come through with some funding to support that rebuild. I noticed there's a 120k difference between what the New Zealand Cycle Trails Fund provided and what we've received. How do we meet that cost of the other 120 grand, and is that within our existing budgets for the August 22 storm event?
Through Mayor Nick, yes. So that's the clip-on bridge for the Down Mountain Copper Mine Trail, the one that when we reinstated our water line. So this is the clip-on to that. We asked for that, we've got 216. The rest is for a council cost, and it's reflected in the costs for the cleanup for June.
And that has been budgeted, or is that 120 now additional to the existing budgets that we had?
It's part of the closing out of business to the end of June last year.
Right, good as gold. Councillor Benj.
Thank you. Alec, what happens to all this gravel you extracted? Do you use it or do you stick it somewhere and compact it?
Good question. We use it. It's great stuff, especially the stuff that comes out from certain of the streams, and we do utilize it as much as we can. It's good stuff.
Thanks.
You got a seconder for this?
I'm going to take you, if I may. Lovely. I think that's been a good discussion. You know, it is a real credit that it's not often that council is considering resolutions to bring works forward. And the resolution number 4 about bringing $5.5 million worth of work forward actually shows that we're making greater progress than we expected in respect of the flood recovery work. And that is a credit to Alec, and he has rightly recognised his team. The resolutions have been moved by Councillor Skinner. They've been seconded by Councillor Courtney. They're now open for debate. There being no debate, then I shall put those. All those in favour shall say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, so no. They are carried. Would a member be so good to move that we now move into confidential business to deal with the, thank you, Councillor Sanson. Is there a seconder? Councillor Brand. That is that we move into confidence in respect of the items of agenda.